I would like to introduce Shane Knorr. So Shane, if you would like to come on up, and we'll go ahead and get started. Shane is the president of Dazzy IT Services. He is the owner and president. He has spent the last 25 years designing, building, maintaining, and supporting IT infrastructures. His experience has spanned the gamut of organizations ranging from a handful of employees to those with thousands of employees, spread across multiple states and countries and industries like financial institutions, local city government, and hospitals. Shane has professional engineer level certifications from Cisco, Microsoft, and other industry-leading security vendors. Shane's current business, Dazzy IT Services, provides managed IT services and advanced managed security services to small and medium-sized businesses in Southwest Missouri and Northwest Arkansas. They've been contracted for services from organizations from Winnipeg, Canada, all the way down to the Florida Keys, which is where we'd all like to be right now.
Exactly.
So without further ado, help me in welcoming Shane.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you guys for coming out today. You know, the big thing for me, I was telling the folks from Connell, I feel like I'm finally growing up. I've always said, you know, it would be so cool to be able to present at one of Connell's seminars. So appreciate Connell inviting us in and allowing us to speak to you today. We're going to be walking through quite a bit of information fairly quickly. It's going to be high level. Take this off where you can hear me a little better. It's going to be high level, so we'll move quickly, but if you have questions, there's an opportunity for a question and answer towards the end of the presentation. So without further ado, we'll jump right in. I'll talk through what the agenda is going to look like. First, before we get started, I've got a couple of questions I want to ask from the audience to kind of get a feel of who's here so that we can speak to things that are relevant to each of you. We're going to be diving into the problem of cybersecurity. And speaking of cybersecurity, it is, I got to tell you, it's amazing to see this many people sitting in a room wanting to hear about cybersecurity. You know, even 2 years ago, it would have probably just been me, Eric, Aaron, Dave, the IT guys that are in a presentation like this. So the fact that we are getting more business leaders into these type of discussions is huge. So kudos to you guys for being here. We're going to talk about how big is this problem? How significant is it? It is growing daily, if not hourly. We're going to talk about how it happens. And the thing that is going to be really cool, I brought my senior network engineer, Mr. Eric Goethals, with us today. Eric and I have worked together for over 20 years. He's one of the sharpest individuals I've ever worked with. He's going to actually walk you guys through a hacking demo to show you just how easy it is for the bad guys to actually get into your systems and get your information. It doesn't require someone at his level to do it. It can be somebody as dumb as me who can get in and do this type of stuff. So we're going to do the live hacking demo, and then we're going to talk about how we address these concerns, and then we'll wrap up with some question and answer. Fair enough? All right. Before we jump into the survey question real quick, can I get just raise your hands. I know we've got a wide gamut of folks here today. If you are a business manager or leader, can I raise the hands of those? Okay. What about, I know we've got some HR folks here too. Any HR folks? Okay, so about half and half. Okay. Well, it's going to be interesting because the survey we're going to do here, we tend to get different answers in both of those segments. So it'll be interesting to see how this pans out. So. All right, so you've got to choose between one of these two options. Option one, we're going to guarantee you get $500 placed into your bank account. All you have to do is raise your hand and you get $500 guaranteed in your bank account. Option two is you got a 50% chance of getting $1,000 added to your bank account. By a show of hands, who would choose option one? Okay. Who would choose option two? Wow, large majority choose option one. Very interesting. Next question we're going to ask around this, similar question. Option one, you're guaranteed we're going to remove $500 from your bank account. Or option two, you got a 50% chance that we'll remove $1,000 from your bank account. Who's going to choose option one? Who's going to choose option two? It's just the opposite. We had first question, majority of the folks chose option 1. And second question, majority chose option 2. The reason I ask about demographics, when we have HR folks in the audience, you're a little more risk, your analysis of risk is a little more critical. So it's interesting to see that makeup. What this is attributed to is the Kahneman prospect theory. Daniel Kahneman is an Israeli psychologist and economist that got a Nobel, not a prize, it's a, Nobel Prize. So he basically came up with the Kahneman prospect theory that says when faced with a risky choice leading to gains, individuals are typically risk averse, meaning it's that old bird in the hand is worth two in the bush type of theory. You know you're going to get that $500, so you know what's the big deal? You'll take that given. But faced with a risky choice leading to losses, individuals tend to take more risk, which leads to what we are going to talk about when it comes to cybersecurity. We all tend to minimize the risk that we are exposed to when it comes to cybersecurity. How many folks in the room, if I were to ask you, do you think you are going to have a cyber breach attempt today? How many of you would raise your hand? Yeah, that's what I figured. Not very many. Reality is every one of you's got some type of breach going on today. You just don't realize it. You minimize the risk. It goes back to being risk averse when it comes to things that will give you gain, but if it's going to cause you loss, you're a little more risk taking. So human nature to do this. It's proven that that's kind of the gist of most audiences. So over the last 20-some years of being in business, as I travel around, I talk to businesses of all shapes and sizes in all different industries. We cover mainly about a 2.5 hour radius of Branson. And we get 3 typical responses when we start talking about cybersecurity. Most of the time, the first one we get is, we don't have anything anyone would want. I'm a small bakery in Hollister, Missouri. I don't have anything anybody would want to steal or take from us. Or we're too small. We don't really have any concerns about cybersecurity. We're a 5-man shop. We don't have any risk, right? Or the one that we're getting more and more frequently now is we're totally cloud-based. How many of you are moving most of your line of business applications into the cloud? Yeah, and that's fairly common at this point. So the problem with this is everyone thinks because we don't have it on premise anymore, we really don't have that big a cybersecurity risk. We're going to talk through what the reality of that actually looks like. And it's really not about anyone wanting your data. It is about everyone knowing that you need your data. And when we hear that we don't have anything anyone would want, I always ask, do you have employees, do you have customers, and do you keep information on any of those? The answer is always yes. We've got employees, we keep social security numbers, we keep bank account information for the direct deposits, we keep health information, especially now with COVID. Same thing applies to your clients. You keep all of this information, and whether it's stored on your servers or on your computers in your office, it's still data that you may say, the bad guys may not necessarily care about the guys that are making $50 transactions at my business, but they know you care about it. And they know that you're regulated by industry concerns. And so they know that regardless of how big or small or what industry you're in, whether you're a retail organization or whether you're a city municipality, you've got information that is valuable to you, and it's very concerning that they keep it safe. So everyone has, every organization, no matter what, has something that someone else, from a bad guy perspective, could profit from. So everyone that's in business today has a cybersecurity risk, and it's significant, and we're going to show you why. So I've got a short video we're going to watch here. I want you to, as we watch the video, pay attention to some of the clues that are in here, watch some of the details that they highlight, and then afterwards we're going to step into how this makes sense.
How did you decide to become a hacker?
Well, I'm not really sure what it means to become a hacker. That's like some guy in a hoodie who types really fast and stays up all night writing code and cracking passwords. It's not me. I just spy on people and see what makes them click. not a bad job.
Mark Hanning, CEO of Qualicart, set to report earnings after their blockbuster IPO.
So you consider this a job?
I put a lot of work into this. I'm not lazy. It takes research to figure out the key players and learn all about them, their families, their friends, what they care about. You have to understand the company's organization. I get a lot of my information from the sales department because they're always so quick and eager. They're hungry. People trust too easily. They don't look at the details. I do. Details matter. That's what I'm good at. It has to look completely believable. It has to look familiar. This is where research is important. It's not some generic piece of spam. It's an email from their boss with their company's signature. It's written in the voice of the boss. It's what he would say if he were writing this.
What about the malware itself? How does that work?
Somebody else out there already wrote all the code that does the actual attack. I'm just using it in the attachment. My skill is in my ability to get a bunch of people to click on that attachment. I always wonder what it's like when the whole thing unfolds on their end, when the panic sets in.
Please leave your message after the beep.
Hey, this is Rajiv in finance. Call me as soon as you get this. Something's up with my laptop. I can't.
Are you on your way to the office? Something's going on with our file servers.
Karen in HR, our benefits dashboard seems really slow. We're getting calls from users on it. Can you call when you get this? Joining conference now.
Apparently, there's a malware attack targeting our main.
It's ransomware. They're holding us hostage. We're locked out of everything. I can't even check my phone. What about the backup?
That will take days.
We need this fixed now. Just pay it. We don't have a choice. We're reporting earnings in 2 hours.
But how do we know
Just
that they'll...
pay it. Put every single person on getting us back up and running. That's the only priority now. Okay, it's done. I have the decrypt key. Mark, we have a big problem. The ransomware was just to distract us. They got inside. They got everything. Customer data, financials, everything.
Qualicart is reeling today from the news that hackers have released the personal information of nearly
The
2
Nasdaq
million
closed
customers.
lower today, led by Qualicart, which was down 14% on news that their recent data breach may be far worse than the company
Its
originally
stock fell
acknowledged.
to a new all-time low on news that CEO Mark Hanning is stepping down after what is turning out to be one of the worst breaches of personal information in recent history.
Do you feel bad about releasing the personal information? All the financials? All the money that was lost?
All I did was get the files. I'm not the one that decided to release them. I'm not the one that shorted the stock. Somebody else had their reasons for that. It's above my pay grade. I was paid to do a job, and I did it well. And that's what's expected of anyone, isn't it? Anyway, markets bounce back.
Anyone else get a little shiver down your spine watching that? I can tell you from an IT perspective, that's the stuff that those of us that work in IT on a daily basis, that's the stuff of nightmares to us. We do everything we can think of on a daily basis to secure the environment, to make sure that our workplace is taken care of. And all it takes is a moment of someone's inattentiveness, and it's all locked up just like this. What we're seeing, and this is actually, the video for that is actually from 2016, so it's several years old. So that $1 billion market size is dwarfed at this point. It has gotten extremely lucrative for folks to get into this type of business. How many of you, when you saw the young lady in the video, how many of you thought that would be the hacker that everyone thinks of? Everyone has this picture of the guy sitting in his hoodie in his basement with the lights down low, hunched over his keyboard like you see in the pictures. That's what everyone thinks when it comes to hackers. It doesn't require that anymore. And we're gonna step through what that really looks like and just how dangerous it is. So let's go back to some of those objections that we normally get. We're too small to have to worry about cybersecurity. The market and the data actually says that that's completely false. Actually, 71% of small businesses are the target of ransomware. Why is that? Well, if you think about it, you start looking at the large corporate level organizations. They've got full IT departments. They've got tools and software to help secure the environment. They've got budget established year after year after year for IT expenses. So if you're going to go after someone to steal from, are you going to go after the guy that's got the fortress built around him, or are you going to go after the guy that's got a padlock on the door? You're going to go after the guy that's just got the padlock. Because small businesses typically, if they're under 50 employees, it's very rare to have a full-time dedicated IT department. It's also very rare that they have a full-time dedicated IT budget. So if I'm going to go after someone, I'm going to go after the folks that really don't have dedicated focus or resources allocated for this. That's why 71% of the market when it comes to ransomware is small and medium-sized businesses. They're a much easier target for the bad guys. So that whole we're too small to have to worry about cybersecurity is thrown completely out the window. If you've ever thought that, please, if nothing else, when you leave here today, make sure you realize that it's just the opposite. You are the target. Let's dig into we're completely cloud-based, so we don't really have to worry about cybersecurity and talk through that. Any dental offices in the audience today? Okay, so hopefully you didn't use InSync as one of your software providers. This happened just this past year. InSync is a large dental software provider for dental offices. It's completely cloud-based, and the advantages for dentists is that you don't have to worry about storing all this software on premise. You run it in the cloud, and it's just a subscription model. Sounds pretty safe, right? You don't have to worry about securing that data. In reality, InSync was the one that got ransomed. So instead of one dental office being impacted, it was multiple offices, all shut down, could not do business. So if you're, regardless of whether you're in the dental business, imagine if you come in and you cannot process any of your normal day-to-day stuff. You can't see patients, you can't schedule things, you can't process credit cards, all down. You were in the cloud, you thought you were secure. The reality is, being cloud-based, while it's convenient and you feel like you're getting some safety and security, it actually adds more complexity. Because you cannot control the endpoints and what data, what happens with that data in the cloud, you lose a little bit of the flexibility that you have. It's a convenient and very valid methodology to get to your applications today. We use mostly cloud-based applications, but it does not simplify or even come close to removing the risk that you're exposed to. And the reality is very few organizations are completely cloud-based. Those that are moving your applications to the cloud, I bet you still have a file server on premise or a print server or an Active Directory server. You still have some resources that are on premises today. Even if you're moving to the cloud, I have yet to find an organization that doesn't have some type of localized resources, at least in our market. You get into some of the more metro areas and some of the startups that are purely from day one in the cloud, it's a little different story. But in our market, it's very rare that we find anyone that has nothing that's on site. So let's talk about how big the problem is. This data is actually back from the first of the year, but prior to COVID. COVID has changed everything when it comes to cybersecurity risk. It has taken what is an astounding number here and blown it out of the water. Before COVID, we had a 365% increase year over year in ransomware. Particularly, can I get a show of hands of how many municipalities are in the room? Okay, so quite a few. You guys, I hope you know, you are the #1 target for ransomware. Why? Because as an individual business, if I get ransomware and I can't pay the ransom and I can't get to my data, I can put a lock on the door and close up shop. Cities, I mean, technically, I guess you can go bankrupt and shut down the city, but it's really not likely and it's not an easy process. So the bad guys know as a city, if they ransom you, there's a much higher likelihood that they're going to get some type of payment. The other thing is cities are regulated. You have to answer to your constituents. You're going to be probably required to carry more insurance as at an insurance event here. So they know if they go after a city, there's a higher likelihood they're going to have some type of cyber liability coverage that's going to help pay that ransom. So cities become the #1 target. there have been some huge cases. So City of Atlanta, everyone kind of familiar with City of Atlanta and their ransomware? Won't go into a lot of details unless we have questions on it. They're one of the first high-profile large cities that was hit with ransomware. So when it happened, City of Atlanta said, you know what, we're not going to pay the bad guys this ransom. We're going to try to restore and rebuild things on our own. The original ransom was, I think less than $100,000, wasn't it, Eric? In the big scheme of things, less than $100,000. You're thinking, well, is it worth it? No, we're not going to pay that. Right now, the running total for the recovery is a little over $18 million to get them back up and running. So they were the first high-profile city that faced this. Shortly thereafter, City of Baltimore was hit with ransomware. Same type of scenario. The interesting thing about City of Baltimore, the ransom attack that was launched actually used an NSA internal tool to get access to their system. So it was a government tool that was supposed to only be used by the NSA that somehow got out into the wild. The bad guys used it to ransom City of Baltimore. They took the same approach. We're not going to pay these guys. We don't negotiate with terrorists, as the American motto is. Same type of scenario. Last running total for them is a little over 20 million that they're working through, and they're still not back up 100% functional. So those two were the first ones that really got national headlines and attention that, hey, this is a problem. We got to give it some serious attention. So the next one that we're going to talk through is a little more interesting. City of Riviera Beach is a small community in southern Florida. So City of Riviera Beach had an internal IT guy, and they got ransomware. And so the immediate thought after you get ransomware is we got to recover from backup, right? Well, the IT guy says, hey guys, I've been on the docket for the last 10 years telling you that our backup methodology is not sufficient. We have to upgrade this. Year after year after year, they've been told we don't have budget to do that. We can't afford to invest in the infrastructure and the capital expense it's going to take to get that backup infrastructure set up the way you want. Ironically, this happened in 2019. They had just finally, after 10 years jumping up and down screaming, we need better backups, they had just approved the purchase of the new backup hardware and software. It was still sitting in the boxes in the offices, had not been deployed yet. So when this happened, backups are no good. We can't recover from this. So what do? Their only choice at that point, or at least what they perceived as their only choice, was we got to pay the ransom. They were one of the first cities that said, at least widely publicized cities, that said, we're going to pay these guys. About $500,000 that got paid out in ransom. They were able to get most of their data back, but they set a precedence at that point. Okay, we've got a city on the hook that's not paying us $10,000, they're paying hundreds of thousands of dollars. Okay, now we got an opportunity. Less than a month later, City of Lake City, Florida. I grew up in the Panhandle of Florida, love the area. City of Lake City is about the size of Nixa, if it gives you the scope of what we're talking about. City of Lake City, Florida was right behind City of Riviera, two cities in the same state. We've got some commonalities here. Same, about roughly the same size. City of Lake City was in the same scenario. They had an internal IT department. He had been requesting additional resources. Their backups were no good, same type of scenario. He gets to the point where we know we're not going to be able to recover, we got to pay the ransom. So almost $600,000 paid out from City of Lake City. So now we've got $1 million in ransom paid out to the bad guys in under 60 days. Now we've set the trip alarm out and everyone knows, let's go hunting. City of Lake City, Florida, the IT director, unfortunately, in my opinion, was kind of used as a scapegoat. He was terminated right after this happened. He may have been at fault, I don't know. They've not released a lot of the details, but unfortunately, my gut tells me he's probably been telling folks for years, we've got issues we need to address, we need budget for it, and because we go back to that Kahneman theory, prospect theory, we're willing to take a risk when it involves losses, and probably he didn't get what he asked for. Don't know that for a fact, but he was terminated as a result of this. Towards the end of the summer last year, there were 23 Texas cities on the same morning ransomed. If that doesn't get your attention, I don't know what's going to get your attention. 23 cities all at one time, locked up, unable to do business, literally within hours of each other. And unfortunately, the important thing with this one, it came through their service provider. A company like DASI that wasn't taking proper security protocols, they breached their systems, which gave them access to every one of their clients. So even though the cities thought they were doing what they needed to be doing, their service provider was not. So this is not a single faceted threat. This is exposed through everyone that interacts within your systems. Monroe College. So this one is important because it's the first one that there's a ransom over $1 million, at least the ones that's published anyway, widely published. Small college in New York hit with a $2 million ransom. It kind of set that bar that, hey guys, we can go fishing for the big fish right now. Anyone familiar with Crowder College? Right here in our backyard. Do you guys know that they had a ransomware issue last August? Yeah. So the interesting thing about the one at Crowder College, I put it up here because it brings it local to us. It means something. It's in our backyard. These are folks we know. Crowder College, right before school's supposed to start in August, they get a ransom attack. What they ended up finding is the bad guys had been on their network for almost 1.5 years. That's important because what we're seeing this more and more. The bad guys are getting into the networks. It used to be 5-10 years ago when guys would breach the network and they'd launch ransomware, it was an immediate. We do it right then because we don't want to take chances that someone's going to find it. Let's ransom it right now. What we're seeing now is the bad guys get into the network and they stay in the network undetected. The average is 12 months. Sometimes it's even longer. What they're doing is they're doing reconnaissance, they're gathering information, they're using that to make sure that when they launch the attack, it is of massive value to the client. Crowder College said, we're not paying a $1.6 million ransom. We're going to just go back to pen and paper. And they did that. They got classes up and going in August. Still recovering from it, but it was in our backyard. The next one, do we have any runners or cyclists in the room? Few, yeah. You guys wearing a Garmin? So the big joke with those that run and cycle is if it didn't get recorded with Garmin, it didn't happen. So Garmin is, if you're not familiar with their GPS manufacturer, they do not just running and cycling and athletic devices, they do aviation devices, they do boating devices, basically GPS functions. So the big one with this one, they were down, this is about a month ago, well, not even that, a few weeks ago, they were down for a solid week, could not get any of their uploads to work. The clients were jumping up and down screaming, I can't upload my run, I want to make sure everyone knows that I ran. For almost a week. And as it stands today, there's not solid data on this, but it's reported that they feel like it was a $10 million ransom that they actually paid to get back up and operational. So the question I asked after kind of going through this, if you can see the gamut of these type of organizations that have been hit by ransomware, if a Garmin, who has a massive budget for IT infrastructure and staffing and tools, can pay out a $10 million ransom, why on earth would anyone think I'm not at risk? Goes back to that Kahneman prospect theory that we minimize risk if it's going to cost something. So unfortunately, I've got another story I want to step through, and it's a little different. It's not a ransomware story, but it's also one that has a very costly outcome. This is actually a local Ozarks company that we were called in to assist with in the last couple of months. Small organization by relative terms, 10 to 12 individuals that worked at the company. Local, been in business for almost 20 years. Had mostly a fairly technical staff. The guys that worked there and the girls that worked there, they knew their way around technology. So it wasn't a matter of these guys just didn't know any better. They're fairly technical. Most of their tools, when we start asking, what do you have on site? Well, we're mostly cloud-based. So not a whole lot we have to worry about. Yeah, mostly is the key there. Using Office 365. How many folks in the room use Office 365 for your email? Yeah, we're seeing just about everyone go to Office 365. It's a great tool, software as a service, gets you up and running very quickly with a ton of features, so it's a great feature. The owner actually set up the Microsoft Office 365 setup because it's fairly straightforward. He's technical, did it himself. Unfortunately, he made some mistakes in this, and it's not necessarily his fault. He didn't realize what was needed or required to secure the environment, but one of the biggest ones was he was using his personal email as the admin account, which is no-no. If you're doing that today, don't do that. Get another admin account set up. And more importantly, he had no multi-factor authentication. You guys familiar with what that is? Probably you've seen. In the early days, multi-factor authentication was the text that came to your phone. Some applications still use that. But today we use the Google Authenticator app on your phone that has a time-based token that rotates every 30 seconds. Without that enabled, all you really need is someone's username and password to get admin access to Office 365, and that's what happened in this instance. The other thing that was not set up efficiently was they had forwarding allowed. We deal with a lot of small businesses in all different areas of categories. We always get the request, hey, I've got my Yahoo account that I've had for 20 years. I really just want to be able to forward my business account to my Yahoo because I love Yahoo. Well, it's a bad idea to allow forwarding outside of the Office 365 domain because what happened in this individual instance, once someone breached the admin account on his Office 365, they set up forwarding so that they got copies of every email that came to the owner's inbox. And if that doesn't scare you, think about the stuff you get in email. Bank, customers, internal, personal stuff, all went to the bad guys. And then they went a step further where they said, because they sat in on the network and they watched what was coming in via email, they knew what projects were going on, they knew what invoices were coming in, they knew what bank accounts that were going to be used. And so at the right time, they had a large project going on, they set up forwarding so that when they got an invoice from their vendor, the owner never actually got that invoice. It went to an external email address the bad guys were using. And so they knew what the amounts were from the vendor. They replicated that email, sent it to the owner with fake, or not fake, but fraudulent bank information. So what was a legitimate invoice from their vendor came in via email, got retransmitted to the owner with fraudulent bank account information. The owner gets the email, says, hey, I got to pay this. This project's coming up next month. We got to fulfill it. Send out payment. Almost $220,000 sent out to fraudulent actors. Why did he send it? Well, it's a legitimate project. We know what's going on. We've been talking about it. We've got to pay these invoices. He even went as far as picking up the phone and calling his sales rep saying, hey, I just got this invoice from you guys. Do we really need to pay this right now? And is this the correct bank account? Sales guy said, oh, yeah, you got to pay it because I'm worried about getting my sale closed up. I'm a salesperson too, so I take no offense at that. But sales guy said, yes, you got to pay it. That's a legitimate invoice. Go ahead and pay it. Sent the money. Happened over the course of almost a month that the money was sent. Unfortunately, unless this is caught within the first 24 to 48 hours, the chances of recovery are almost zero. He engaged the local FBI office. The FBI office has been so inundated with these issues, it took them almost 2 days to actually get an agent on site to talk to them. It's not, it's nothing bad against the FBI, it's just they can't keep up. When we were engaged, we actually reached out to Microsoft to try to get some of the deeper logs to help the FBI. Unfortunately, Microsoft told us they are getting so inundated with these requests on a daily basis, they can't keep up either. This is just occurring so frequently that it's become happening. You're just going to have to deal with it. So very unfortunate situation. Likelihood that he's ever going to see any of that money is pretty nil. And so I asked the local business owners that are in the room here today, really run through this in your mind. If you were to lose $200,000 today, because the thing is, he still had the projects that needed to be done. He still had to go out and pay those legitimate invoices. So he's out the $200K to the bad guys. He's still got to come up with $200K to send to get his stuff released. Think about that when it comes to how serious is cybersecurity for your organization. And the last thing I'll point out, there was no cyber liability coverage here. If you guys, how many of you have general liability? Everyone's got general liability coverage, I hope. You've got a Connell event, so I know you do. A lot of people, a lot of people assume that the general liability coverage has some cyber coverage to it. And some policies do, but I will tell you for the vast majority of them, that coverage is very, very limited, and it's probably going to exclude issues like this. You need a specific cyber liability policy. And if you don't have that in place today, You've got Connell representatives in the room. Have that conversation before you leave here today. I promise you, it is probably the best money you can spend when it comes to protecting your organization. So let's talk about, we've talked about how bad the problem is. Hopefully everyone's convinced at this point it's not something you should ignore anymore, something you should give some attention to. But just how hard is it to really go out and do this stuff? We saw the young lady in the video. Probably not everyone's thought when it comes to a hacker or a bad guy trying to get into your system. It's really not as hard as what most people think. It used to be those guys sitting in the hoodie that are real techy and knew how to write codes that were doing this. Everyone's probably familiar with software as a service, right? It's basically where we move from buying software licenses on a one-time purchase, and we kept them for 5 years, didn't update them, and then the company came back to us and said, hey, we want you to upgrade. Well, we don't want to spend the money. So software as a service came out where you pay a subscription. It's a monthly expense. It spreads that capitalization out over years and also ensures that you're always kept up to date. Great thing. Now we're starting to see everything as a service. I think my vet even has our veterinary service as a service where we can pay a monthly subscription and don't have to pay a bunch when we go in. So everyone's getting into this game, and unfortunately, ransomware is as well. As it stands today, there are numerous places on the internet that you can go and you can subscribe to ransomware as a service for as little as $90 a month. So if you're having trouble making ends meet and you want to get some additional income, go get ransomware as a service, $90 a month. You can start sending out your own ransomware campaigns. The only caveat is, because this is a business model that everyone's jumping into now, you still have to give 15% back to the guys you're subscribing to, off of whatever you get, though. But we'll go off the honor system. You'll have to tell us what you actually got in ransom. So it's going to be a little tough for you guys to see from where you are, but I will kind of step through this. So the slides that are up right now are actual ads. It's like a shopping site on the internet for ransomware kits. The thing that's interesting, they've got all the specifications listed out. They've even got a Black Friday special if you order on Black Friday. If you order next Tuesday, it's going to go up double. So make sure you get it on Black Friday, just like a shopping site. The other thing is they've got responsive layout. So if you want to do ransomware when people are using their mobile phones, don't worry. We've got you a responsive website that you can use for this. They'll even do hosting for you. So if you don't want to have to go out and host your own scripts, they'll provide the hosting for you as well. You just pick this up. It's $32 to add that in. So pretty easy add-on there. The other thing is that they do specify they're not going to provide you the list of people to send it to. You've got to provide your own spammer list that you want to send this out to. So, that's keeping it pretty on the up and up. This one, again, is a little tough to see the image, but basically this is a real legitimate job posting that was on the dark web. Everyone familiar with dark web? Most people? A few no's? Okay, so without going into a ton of detail, the dark web is the unindexed portion of the internet. It's kind of the underbelly of the internet. It's where all the bad stuff happens. Where Google indexes all the websites, and you can go to www.connell.com, it translates that to an IP address. The dark web is basically the underbelly that's not indexed by Google. So you have to kind of have specialized software to get there, torrent software. So this is a place where bad guys can go. They get these shopping sites where they can buy the ransomware as a service, but they've also got job posting. If you're not making a really lucrative income right now, you might want to get into this, especially if you have some technical skills. You can make $63K a month by becoming one of the programmers for these guys. Not bad if you want to get into that type of industry. But, there's some qualifications here. We're not going to accept everybody. If you're thinking about it now, do you have 10 years of experience that you can bring innovative approaches to this type of bad stuff? The other thing is that is very comical to me. That type of income is contingent upon positive performance. You got to get some good reviews back, or else you're not going to make that kind of money on this position. It's crazy. This is a legitimate, pulled from the dark web job posting. So it's becoming one of the largest crime delivery methods out there today. What used to be robbing banks, 100 years ago, is now robbing people through this type of stuff. So it's a lucrative business. It is very enticing for folks, especially in Eastern Europe, where the economies aren't as great as ours. You start talking about this type of income, It makes you want to pick up a programming book fairly quickly, I think. So let's talk about the most common threat vectors we've seen over the last 6 months. So it really comes down to 2 different types of attacks. We saw how many of the folks were in the room that are using Office 365 or some type of cloud email. Most of the time, we're seeing upwards 75, 80% of the businesses that we talk to are going with an Office 365 or Google G Suite setup. So that's probably the number one that we see is email compromise. And we talked through some of what goes into that, and we'll go into a little more detail. And the other side is the actual ransomware, where they're getting in and they're ransoming the data and holding it hostage. Now, the important thing when it comes to ransomware, up to this point, has mainly been pay us a ransom to unlock your data, and we'll maybe give you the key. We may not. You may pay us, and then we say, well, we want a little bit more money, and then we'll give it to you. Or we'll give you the key for some of your data, but not all of it. That was kind of the early days. What we're seeing now that's a little more scary when it comes to ransomware, they're actually watching what industries you're in, and if you're in a regulated industry such as healthcare, or you're regulated by PCI or SOX, they know you've got fines that are significant if that data gets exposed. GDPR just was passed last year in the EU. There's legislation coming to the US that's going to be the same here. They've already passed legislation in California, New York. It's coming to Missouri. There's already some bills on the docket for the state of Missouri, basically stating that if you have customer data that is breached, you have to notify those customers within X amount of hours, or else you face fines. And so what the bad guys are doing with ransomware right now is they may do both. They may ransom to get you to where you can get back into your data, but then they say, you know what, now that I look at this data, you guys have healthcare data. How much would you pay to keep me from posting all this healthcare data out on the internet where you now are subject to HIPAA fines? And anyone in the healthcare industry knows HIPAA fine is nothing that you take lightly. Just compounds the issue when it comes to ransomware. So kind of going back over the business email compromise attack, it almost always comes down to admin access that is breached. Again, going back to normal user accounts, if you're using an admin account for your everyday email, that is a big risk factor that you've thrown into the mix. Comes down to compromised credentials, and we're going to talk about that in a little more detail on how that happens. It's not as hard as you think to get your password. No multi-factor authentication added to the accounts. Forwarding rules have been enabled. No DKIM and SPF enabled. This is technical jargon. Basically, it's a framework to authenticate who is allowed to send and receive to your email domain. That stuff's not set up properly. The other one that's a big one, and it also played into the local organization that was affected by this, there's no geolocation restrictions. What we mean by that, if you're operating your business in Branson, Missouri, the chances of you logging in from Lithuania, probably pretty slim. But unfortunately, the way Microsoft is set up by default, it allows a login no matter where you are in the world. So what they're doing is the Eastern Europe bloc is where most of this is originating. Because there's no restrictions, those guys know they can log into Office 365 into your tenant and get access. The way you get around that is you put geo restrictions to say we only allow logins from the US, and I would even go as far as to say central US and kind of narrow that down depending on the admin levels. But most accounts don't have that. It's an additional cost to get that in Office 365, as it stands today anyway. But that's another piece that most typically gets avoided. Poor password hygiene requirements, and we'll talk through that in a little bit. And they're doing this for, originally they did go in with reconnaissance as the main objective, because again, they want to get legitimate vendors, legitimate invoices, and legitimate information. Because it's going to, when the attack is launched, it's got convincing authority to make sure that you pay it. The other one, I don't want to see a show of hands. We probably don't want to disclose that. Most of the organizations don't have a secondary review of bank or wiring transactions. And what I mean by that, when there's a request to wire money, if you get it via email, if you're not doing this today, go back and talk to your office admins. Make sure before any wire transfers are completed that there's a physical verification of that wire. I got an email from Eric saying I owe $10,000, I need to pay it. Click this link to do it. I'm going to call Eric. Eric, did you just send me this? Is this legitimate? I'm showing a bank account ending in 040, is that correct? Okay, then I initiate the transfer. What we're seeing is most organizations just initiate that transfer and assume it's okay. So when it comes to ransomware, the number one means to exploit via ransomware is phishing. You guys familiar with the term phishing? We'll talk through some examples, but basically it's that email that's trying to get you to click on something or do something, download a file or open a file. The second most used means is compromised credentials, and a lot of times these work in tandem. Really only about 9% of ransomware is deployed through what we would traditionally call hacking, where someone is trying to actively get into your system by a vulnerability in the firewall or the software you're using. Everyone kind of thinks, well, ransomware occurs because people hack into our systems. No, it doesn't. People don't hack into the system. You open the door for them. Malware is less than 10%. So really, everyone's what they think of ransomware comes down to those. They think it's hacking or a virus itself. It really comes down to the top two is the main deployment method. So again, you can't really see this. If you've been on some of our other webinars over the summer with Connell, we've got those posted online as well so that you can see them. There's some very common things when it comes to phishing emails. There's almost always going to be a fake email address at the top, but it's going to look convincing. This one has the domain as cdc-gov.org. Well, CDC, you think, okay, cdc-gov, that's probably legit, right? No, cdc.gov, not -gov.org. Fake domain. There's going to be some generics when it comes to who it's coming to. Not always, though. A lot of times they'll get that legitimate information. There's almost always, and I would say upwards of 80%, some type of urgency in the email. We need you to respond by 4 o'clock today. This needs to be completed now. We need you to respond immediately. They're instilling that urgency so that you don't take time to look at it. There's always grammatical errors because, again, it's coming from the Eastern Europe bloc primarily. A lot of that is just a rush job to get it out. They're spamming a bunch of people at once, and they almost always have some type of attachment or a link to click. The one I'll point out on this one, again, it's hard to see from where you're at, but the name of this company is Miller Supply. Their legitimate domain name is millersupply.co. What they're doing, and as you saw in the video, they're changing one letter in the domain. A lot of times what will be an L will be replaced with a 1. Or like in this one, Miller, instead of it being M-I-L-L-E-R, it's 2 N's. So it looks the same at first glance. If you're not paying close attention, that's coming from our boss at Miller Supply Company. It's a coronavirus notice, which, speaking of coronavirus, we talked about how bad things were before coronavirus. There's actually been a 300% uptick in phishing emails since coronavirus because everyone knows we're on edge. We're worried about, does our coworker have symptoms and do we have to worry about that? And if we've got to go get tested and those type of things, people are watching for these type of emails and they're more likely to click on them. The other thing was with the payroll protection program, the PPP program, that was another big one that we saw a bunch of small business administration emails go out. SBA loans, people were anxious to be one of the first to get in that to make sure they get funding. People were clicking on emails left and right. Unfortunately, convenience is creating chaos. You look across this list of all the cloud sites we use, unfortunately, 76% of folks in this room, how many of you reuse passwords in between sites? Oh, wow, we got people that even raise your hand. Most of the time people, I will admit, I was guilty of that until a few years ago as well. If you're reusing passwords between Amazon, Hulu, Netflix, and your Office 365 account, or your internal network, you have basically set the dominoes up waiting for someone to tap on them. Never, ever from this day forward use the same passwords between sites or any derivation of the same password. So a lot of people say, oh, I change it all the time. I use Shane 20. Next year I'll use Shane 21. Okay, that took about a half a millisecond for the scanning program that they used to pick that up. So you're not using a different password. It's the same password. All right, so COVID, we all got pushed into working remotely overnight, it seems. We had to do this in a hurry. We did not have time to prepare properly. A lot of organizations, this happened, like I say, literally overnight, so they use remote desktop to get in from home. Anyone familiar with this application? Okay, hopefully you're not getting it over the internet without this proper security behind it. It's nicknamed the ransomware delivery connection because it is one of the most widely exploited connection methods to get into your internal network. A lot of organizations have it exposed to the internet and don't even know it. They've got it opened up on the firewall because someone in the organization needed to get access quickly and it was an easy place to enable it. The real danger is if it's unsecured to the internet. That goes along with that poor password hygiene. If you're reusing passwords, this creates that domino effect that you're really waiting for the problem to happen. In fact, there have been 3 separate FBI warnings specifically about remote desktops. So if you're using this today, you have to secure it. I'm going to breeze through these next because I'm running a little behind schedule. Drive-by infections. So one of the things that people think of is that you have to download something to actually become infected. It's not the case anymore. Adware and malware is embedded into legitimate websites. New York Times has been a victim of it, the NFL website, Spotify, and tons of others. It is estimated that 40% of the malicious content that's online is actually embedded into legitimate websites. What happens is while New York Times has a legitimate website, they've got banner ads that run over on the side. Because they have advertisers that can upload those without a lot of oversight, malicious images get uploaded that have code embedded that you don't even have to click on anything. Once you load the image, depending on your browser and the OS you're using, it can actually start infecting your system right then. Public Wi-Fi. I started to bring an additional access point today and set it up, but I thought it would be mean. How many of you travel for business? Quite a few. Okay, so when you're going through the airport, you know, it's always pretty common that, hey, I need to jump on the Wi-Fi, right? If you're using public Wi-Fi, you really need to rethink that in terms of what you do. The challenge that we have, and one of the reasons I was going to bring an additional wireless access point, this is one of the oldest breach means that, as it relates to wireless. It's very, very easy for me to take my MacBook and set up a separate SSID that matches what's the legitimate. And people will connect to it. They'll think that, you know, if we set it up today with Hilton, you could connect to Hilton thinking it's the legitimate Hilton. And all of a sudden now we're passing information to the bad guys. So the question is, what do we do instead of public Wi-Fi? If you can enable your hotspot, do that instead. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eric so we get back on schedule in terms of the hacking demo. It's going to take him a little minute to get set up here. But in the meantime, while he's getting set up, are any specific questions anyone wants to ask over what we went through? I know it was a high level and a lot of information quickly. Scare everyone pretty badly? I don't mean to scare you. Yes? Sure. So the question was, when you get the email, and we get this quite a bit, this looks like it really did come from Eric Goethals, because it's got Eric Goethals in the from address. What you'll notice is that I can change my name that's displayed on the email to whatever I want. So I can say, I'm Bill Gates, send you an email, and it'll show it's from Bill Gates. But if you look at the actual email address itself, you can expand that, depending on the email client you use. You can expand that, and it'll actually show the full email address. The other thing is when you see those phishing emails come to you, a lot of times it'll say, click on the CDC website, and it'll just say CDC website. You can't really tell what that is. If you hover over that link, it'll expose what the full actual URL is. So if it says CDC.Tanzania, that's a dead giveaway. It's not CDC. So good question. So there's a way, the question was, do you have to check each and every email that comes in? Because that becomes very time consuming to actually click. The short answer is there's some additional security measures that you can enable in Outlook and Office 365 that does that for you. That goes back to some of the DKIM and SPF framework that gets set up on the back end, as well as what's called advanced threat protection. There's another feature in Outlook or Office 365 that avoids some of that.
All right, so hopefully everyone's seeing that there's so far a lot of room to kind of pay attention to things, and maybe there's some ways people are getting access to networks that you wouldn't think of. As Shane kind of had alluded to, there's some kind of common conceptions of how that occurs. The other one is that people have a tendency to believe that when somebody gets onto a computer, they have somehow gotten the bad guys on their computer, on their network, that compromise occurs, and then suddenly they're in the network, and they have ransomware or some other problem as a result of that in a quick time frame. And what we're seeing is a lot of these, as he mentioned earlier, there's about 45% of the breaches that occur where they're coming in through some way in email. And so what ends up happening is these things, or you're going by a website, there's several different ways this occurs, but anyway, they will get on your system and there will be a process that will kick off a connection to the bad guy. And so what will end up happening is they will get onto your system within a matter of seconds or minutes, and they will remain on your system for an extended period of time. And they're going to be looking for things on your network that are valuable to them. And what we're seeing is that, as they make the compromise, they bypass security measures, they might do something that antivirus isn't picking up. That's kind of a common thing. They might get through some of your email security. They start sending data off-site. So that might be your financial documents, it might be your healthcare information, it might be some valuable trade secrets. And so data exfiltration means they're sending data off-site, okay? And we're seeing that is, at a later phase, somebody will figure this out. And it might be your IT guy, it might be something you're seeing that's not acting correctly on your system, and you kind of think you might look into that. But the other thing that we're seeing is sometimes it's occurring when a law enforcement agency, federal law enforcement agency, contacts you and says, hey, we've seen some information out there that makes us think you've got something going on your network. So there is an extended period of time between the time that compromise occurs, the time it's discovered, and as we've talked about before with Atlanta and some of these other municipal organizations, it can take somewhere between weeks, months, or even years, depending on how in-depth that breach was, to recover from that. And there might be some elements that you just don't recover from. So Verizon, one of the things that Verizon does, besides provide network and phone service and that sort of thing, is they have a fairly in-depth annual cybersecurity report that comes out. And they look at how things are getting in, what means bad guys use to get onto networks, and they keep a lot of statistics around that. And one of the things that we're seeing is that as of last year, and it may be even longer this year, it took an average of 100 days from the time the system was compromised to the time that it was discovered. And so, just like with Crowder College in Neosho, that was a year and a half. They were around looking on that network. They probably had free reign to look at student data, student social security numbers. 100 days is the average period of time between a compromise and a detection. So, as we mentioned earlier, email is one of the common means of compromise, but beyond email, what kinds of things can happen? Well, once they get to you, and any number of ways that they get to you, meaning by a drive-by download, you go to a trusted website, banner ad download something to your system, you may not even know about it. more commonly, again, email. But once you've gotten your email, there may be a trusted application that looks like it goes with something. You think it's from somebody, you've been corresponding with them, you're expecting it, and they've got a PDF attached, you know they're sending you a document. Well, it may not be that PDF. So the abuse of trusted applications. And on the technical side, there are some other things, PowerShell and some other command line utilities that can be abused to create some paths for them. The new fileless malware downloads, and these are things where there's a problem with your web browser, there's a defect in it, and you go to the website, like I was saying, and a piece of malware is downloaded to your system. Partially remediated incidents. Sometimes you think you've gotten something off of your system. I've run my antivirus, and it has cleaned up things. A lot of times we're finding that not every one of these viruses is exactly alike, or these malware pieces are exactly alike, or the breadcrumbs left behind by the bad guys, we didn't get quite all of them. There's still some left behind. And so partially remediated incidents is another area that they are coming in. It may be they come in later on after they have some new information that they need to get from you. They left some a back door for them to get themselves back into the network, and they will come back in and do some further damage. Commonly, we are finding out that users are, kind of a theme here, it's not a fault of the user necessarily, it is that these means of getting people to download, interact are very convincing, and they can be very hard to detect, again, because we're talking to people. You know, we've got a conversation going with somebody we're expecting to have a conversation with. Somebody else has jumped in the middle of it, which is the business email compromise situation. It might be that we have something kind of related to what I'm going to show you in just a minute. We're expecting, you know, it's not uncommon for us to get, you know, resumes, other documents in from our website or some other place. And so people, you know, in their daily routines, they may not be paying, you know, as close attention one moment from as they do the next, and they open something. So that would be the click happy end users. And so briefly, kind of what ends up happening is, as a victim interacts with some malware or something that is damaging to their system, it gets through their protection. In this case, this is a Word document. It could be Flash. Flash is what has been used on the internet websites to kind of give you some of the graphics, the kind of some of the video-like functions that might look on a web page, some of those things. That's going away, but it's been something that's been used frequently. It could be a browser. Your Chrome might be out of date, and there could be a vulnerability in Chrome. And the scary thing is, any of these things are could be used with a vulnerability that hasn't been discovered by Microsoft or Google or Adobe in this case. And so once they've gotten you to use this trusted application, and you have you know, opened it or interacted with it, they are on your system. And so once they're on your system, they will do things so that they can get back into your system, whether you reboot or power it off and come back to it later. They will do things, and that's called getting a foothold. And so they will do things such as making it their processes run on boot. When you boot up the system, they might set it to where when you log in, it starts the malware, or they might actually have some other things that they do that when you launch programs, it might actually execute other programs that you're not intending to launch. So I'm going to go through this example here, and this is based probably on some real organizations, and they will do some reconnaissance, as we kind of saw in the Cisco video. That was the pretty in-depth one. It doesn't have to be quite as in-depth. Simply getting some, you know, business lists for your area. And we can see that in this case, we've got a bunch of different businesses, and these are, I think, based out of North Carolina. The American Board of Anesthesiology, they're a regulated industry. You know, they have some probably, or they could be regulated. They might have some healthcare information depending on who we interact with. And we can kind of start looking at the website, and we can kind of get an idea of who the players for them are. might even get some email addresses from their website. And kind of as I sort through here, I might look at who is a good target. You know, George Best is the IS manager, so he might be a good candidate to target. So we start looking at things, and we might discover that there are some ways to abuse Office 365. They've left the password out there. By using it in another site. You know, they changed a 19 to a 20, like Shane had said, on their password, which, as we mentioned, is not really a different password. For all the purposes of the bad guys, it is the same password. They might be looking here, and now we find out we've got some job listings. And so if we look at the job listing here, there's something to me that would pop out, and that is the apply on the company website. And so I click on that and see some other means there. Submit all applications to Human Resources. Please submit your application to Human Resources, and it's got any other email address. You know, we kind of can picture this person who is just going to be going through resumes. That's part of their job. There's nothing unusual about that. They have to open these things that people send to them. And we go to the careers page and we find that there's actually a place that we can actually upload our resume. So we fill out this this page and we upload our resume. And so that's kind of where we're at here as far as the actual demonstration is concerned. We have, our bad guy has selected a document, and they have sent it to the human resources person, okay? And so our human resources person, and this is going to be very obvious email to many people that this is probably not something we want to click on and open from, but anyway, I've got this, what I have here is an environment where I have two actual computers running kind of on mine. And so this is really Windows 10. And I've got the human resources person here has a resume. And this resume is a document, something we normally would see attached. Again, there are some clues on here, probably from the email address. This is really obvious that this is probably not something we want to open, but this HR person is going to go ahead and open it. The other system I have here besides the victim is the bad guy's computer. And there was a lot of automated things that occurred for the ransomware attack in the Cisco video, and that still does occur. But as we're starting to see is they will get into your network and they will look around for other things besides just doing the ransomware. There may be some automated processes, but there are frequently some things they have to do while they're on your network to get those automated processes to go further on your network and look around. So this is the bad guy's system, and he's sitting here. He's got this set up. He's sent out his malware or his document here. And so we open the attachment expecting to see a resume, and this is an information security job. So this document is protected. And so, it tells us right here what we need to do to actually see this. Now, this, again, may be obvious to most people. This is not something you generally want to do, but this, we have non-technical users that sometimes are in these positions. So we follow the instructions. We, enable editing, and we enable content, and then we get a word version error. Sometimes this is done intentionally so that this document will get passed around. Hey, I'm having trouble opening this. Can you try? Well, what has happened in the back end here is the bad guy got a connection to the victim's PC when that document opened. So that document opened, it started some stuff in the back end, which connected to the bad guy's computer who's sitting out on the internet. So We are now on the computer here, and I've run a command to basically join that session where the victim is. And so I'm essentially have control of the victim's computer here. And so one of the things I can do, I can look here. I can see that I'm connected. I can get some information on the system that I'm connected to. And I can do things with their system, such as go ahead and set it up to where when they reboot, they reconnect to our bad guy PC. So, you know, I can simply run a command that I've already prepared, and then when they reboot, it'll come back to me. But some of the things I can do on their system, for instance, I can come on here and I can get a screenshot of what is going on their system. So, you know, maybe I get done with that, and then I'm trying to get into some things, and I've got some passwords that I've opened up over here. You know, you probably shouldn't be storing them in plain text, but this is very common. So I take a screenshot of what's on there to see, and lo and behold, on that victim computer, I've got a copy from the bad guy system of what is on their screen, and I can see the passwords that they have on here. So that's probably not really a good thing to have happen. But even further than that, there are other things that we can do on their system to take a look around. So as I come onto the system, I can take a look around in their into the directory of the person's system that we're on. And I can get a list of all the files that are on that system. And I can see there's some things on here. There's some antivirus. There's some some other documents that we might have some interest in. But so I might find, oh, what's this passed out picture here? See what that is. That could be something that's interesting to me. So we will download that to our system here and see what that looks like. And so now I've got a copy of that document here on my system. So I will see what that looks like. And I've got it right here. So this may be something that he probably shouldn't have been storing on his system, but it could be used for blackmail or any number of other things that could be valuable to me as a bad guy. Further than that, maybe we want to get some information on what they're doing, and we know that they access some sites such as you know, banking sites and things like that. And so one of the other things that I can do is I can log what they're typing. And so I can capture that in kind of semi-real time. So I start this process here so that I am now monitoring anything that they are typing on their system from this point forward. So maybe I come back here and I look in my documents folder here, and maybe I need to go ahead and open up my employee roster. Maybe I want to put their passwords in here, and all right. So if I could spell monkey correctly, that would be awesome. All right. So anyway, I've got this here. I've typed it in. I haven't even saved it yet. So switching over to my system. I can kind of look at this and I can see that breaking that out, I can see there were shift keys pressed, I can see what arrow keys were pressed, and I can see this password here that was typed by that person. And so we can tell where they were at, what they were typing, and things like that. So even if they haven't put their password in plain text like we were doing there that we shouldn't be doing, even if they're just going to a banking site is secure, they have a certificate, everything looks good, but I can still capture what they're typing on their computer as they go to those places. So I can still, even though you may have good password hygiene and store it in a secure proper way, I can still figure out what that is if I can get on your system. So the next fun part about this is not only can I kind of get an idea of what's going on their system, but as I'm kind of doing some digging, let's see, do they have a camera? Well, that could be interesting. You know, as people are working from home, maybe they're not necessarily wearing their trousers like they should. That's been a common thing on some web conferences. Or there could be something else that's embarrassing to them. Or maybe they've got something in the background there at the office and they have confidential information on something behind them. So let's see how this goes, but I can look at this and I should be able to stream a copy of their web camera to the bad guy's system. So that is executing off of this system, is grabbing the camera, and as you can see, they have complete control of that camera. So these are some of the things that they can do when they're on your system, just to get information that you may not even realize that they're doing. But once we get done doing our initial run of kind of looking around on the system, maybe I'm decided it's time to go ahead and upload some malware to them. All right, so I've decided to go ahead and upload some ransomware to their system. And not only am I going to upload that ransomware, I'm going to go ahead and run the ransomware. So they don't even have to be on the system and trick them into running this part. I'll just go ahead and run it for them. So come back over here, and lo and behold, I've got my malware loaded onto the system and have started to encrypt their files. And all of this part has been done without the user on the victim system doing anything other than opening that first document that came in as a resume. So this is a fairly simple demonstration. A lot of this can be scripted by some of the bad guys out there, but they also get in manually and look at things at the same time so they can kind of get an idea of what's on the network. They might run processes to scan your network once they're on a system. So you have a firewall in place, that's great. We've gotten past the firewall. We're on the system, we're on the network where you think that you might be secure, and that's really not the case here. So Shane, I'll let you kind of talk through some of the things we can do to kind of prevent this from happening.
Sure. Thank you, Eric. Hopefully that shows you, the idea that someone sitting and trying to actively break into your system is really no longer the case. All it really takes is you opening up that Word document that, how many of you have job postings out right now? How many of you have it on your website? How many of you say upload your resume? Guess what? You're all at risk. So how do we fix this problem? What it really comes down to is you have to mitigate the largest risk that you have, and the largest risk that you have is your staff and employees. Clicking on malicious links, opening attachments that they're not aware of that are coming in. So you really need to be doing end-user security awareness training. How many folks are in the room today actually do this on a monthly basis? It's good to see that it used to be no hands. So one of the things we recommend is every month, even if it's a 2 to 5 minute video, you do some end user security awareness training, helping your end users recognize what are the latest threats and how do you pick them up in emails. There's questions about how do you verify the sender on each of the emails. Those are things that go into this type of training. Advanced threat protection. So if you've got Office 365 or Google G Suite, it's an additional add-on for Office 365, but it's like $2 a user per month. What that's going to do for you, it's going to filter the files that are coming in. It's going to filter the links that are coming in those emails. And if they're malicious, if they're going to Tanzania instead of CDC, it's going to block that link so you can't click on it. It's a no-brainer. $2 a user, add it. DNS filtering. What this allows you to do is make sure that the sites you're going to on the internet are legitimate and not fake sites. The other thing you want to do is at your firewall level, you want to block outbound connections to known bad actor states. So Russia, China, Eastern Europe, those are the largest sources of malicious connections. Unless you do business in those areas, there is no reason that your network should allow a connection to it. It's a setting in the firewall that you just enable. We talked about remote desktop, and I'm not going to go into a ton of detail there because we're running close to our time. But main thing is, if you're running remote desktop, you better be doing it over a VPN, meaning you've got to put in some encryption and credentials to get connected to the system before you hit this remote desktop screen, or using their web gateway, which you go to a actual website to do that. Also implement failed login policy, so if someone tries a password more than 5 times, it automatically locks that account. Implement multi-factor. So additional security measures everyone needs to be taking. And don't worry about trying to take fast notes, because I am talking fast here. There's actually, if you go to dazzy.com/Connell seminar, all of this stuff is out there as well, so you can get this after the fact. And we got some other videos out there for you. Complex passwords, rotating the passwords. We get pushback from just about every organization we go into in the onboarding stage of the relationship. They don't want to enable complex passwords. Why? Because users have trouble remembering them. The way you get around that is not by using a sticky note with your passwords. It's not by using a spreadsheet like you saw on the demo. Don't do that. If you're doing that today, stop. In fact, hopefully I don't run us too long here, but I was at the gas station yesterday filling up my car, and they've got one of the little video screens on, and there's a video that starts playing, and I'm half paying attention, but there's a woman named Maria Menounos or something. She's actually telling you, because of COVID, the thing you need to do is get a little black book and store all of your banking information and your passwords in case you get sick, so that your family members can get in if you are incapacitated. Don't do that. That's a horrible idea. I don't care who Maria Menounos is, don't do that. Use a password manager. You can store that information securely, encrypted, and actually have it generate these complex passwords for you. It's a minimal expense. Don't use a little black book, please. Active Directory. So Active Directory is what authenticates all of your users into your organization. What we find is that's very rarely cleaned up in most small and medium-sized businesses. So Fred, that worked in accounting last September, was let go. He's still got an account in there. That doesn't sound like that big a deal until you got remote desktop opened up because of COVID. And now Fred's credentials that he also used on Amazon give access to your network. Dark web monitoring, that's another piece. You need to be, with dark web monitoring, you can see what credentials that are tied to your company are for sale out on the dark web. And this is important because you want to make sure that if there's anything posted on the dark web, you review that and make sure you never use that password for any site ever again. As a side note, there's actually a new term coming out now called light web. Dark web is the underbelly of the internet. Light web is legitimate. If you've ever seen the Spokio ads when you do a search for someone's name, all of your data, there's approximately between 1,000 and 2,000 data points on every one of us on these light web sites. It's available for purchase for 99 cents. Doesn't seem like that big a deal. All they really have is your anniversary and your dog's name and the sites that you visit. Wait a minute. Don't we use those for password reset questions? Spend 99 cents on the information, run the dark web, find some users. Now we've got information to reset passwords. Limit administrative permissions. We also get pushback on this. We need everyone in our organization to be able to install their own software. We don't want to have to call the IT department or our service provider. Well, do you also want them to install ransomware? If the answer to that is no, everyone should not be an administrator. I know it's tough and it's a pain, but these are the security mechanisms that you have to put in place. Advanced endpoint protection. You can't really see this, but traditional AV does not cut it anymore. The static list that you download, that changes on a daily basis. What you need is advanced endpoint protection that uses, the most advanced endpoint protection today uses an artificial intelligence or AI to analyze the activity that's going on the system. So it monitors how fast files are changing, if there's registry key changes, and it terminates based upon activity, not on a list. And also, most of them today have a ransomware rollback feature where they can actually detect when ransomware occurs and roll it backwards to a point in time prior to the encryption. Some of these will actually even tie in with the firewall so that it can shut down access. Once it detects a system on the network, it will isolate that system and no longer allow it to communicate with anything else on the network. Again, I said this earlier, but please, if you are not sure whether you have cyber liability coverage or you know you don't, make sure you talk to one of the Connell representatives today before you leave. Please, please, please. Because I don't want to get a call from an organization that says, we've got an issue, we got to pay $1 million ransom, and we don't have coverage. Because there's really nothing you can do at that point. Last thing I'm going to put up here in terms of recommendations, and again, you'll get this on the website if you request it. Incident response plans. One thing that COVID has taught us more than anything else is that we cannot predict what's going to happen. You need an incident response plan for every common scenario. You need to be able to document what needs to happen ahead of time, because when it happens, you're panicked. When COVID hit, we all panicked. We had to get home. When ransomware hits, you're going to be even more panicked. What do I need to do? How do I recover? Document who needs to be contacted. If you've got cyber liability coverage, one of the first things you're going to need to do, first contact your IT department or your IT service provider. Next is going to be contacting Connell. The reason for that is because Connell can plug you into legal representation. They can plug you into folks that can help negotiate ransoms. If it occurs, they can help provide you guidance through the process. That needs to be in a process that you know, because again, you are going to be panicked when this happens. And you need to be able to record what actions you took, because when it comes to an insurance claim, they're going to want to know who was talked to, when, and what did you do. That incident response plan allows you to document that and follow the same process and checklist on every scenario. All right, so resources for you guys. Because we've got the relationship with Connell, and they've been such a great partner for us. I've done business with Connell personally for the last 20 years, I think, close to it. Can't find a better partner in the area. They are sponsoring us coming in and talking to you today. Because of that partnership, if you guys want us to come in and audit your Office 365 configuration, we'll do that completely free of charge. I will tell you, our engineering team, we're about a 4 to 5 week backlog right now. So if you're interested in that, get signed up. You can fill out the form that's on the tables with you, or if you go to dazzy.com/Connell seminar, we got a web page set up that has a bunch of tools and resources for you there, and you can sign up there. You can also get a dark web scan so you see what passwords are for sale in your organization. Our password identity management solution, you can get a 60-day use of that so you can see the difference between using a sticky note and a true password manager. And the last thing that we throw in there, the incident response platform we use, it's a web-based tool so that you can log everything right there. There's free COVID plans. If you want to use it for COVID, you get free access to that. So, ran close to time. All right. Okay. Quickly, any questions that I can help answer before we jump off here? And Eric and Anthony will be around as well afterwards if you have individual questions you want to throw out to them as well. Yes, ma'am. Excellent question. So the question was, how do you recognize that there has been a breach? If we know that antivirus isn't cutting it anymore, we know that firewalls will miss it, how do you know? Well, that comes down to you need to have advanced monitoring in place. So there's additional software that we utilize for our clients that, antivirus looks for malicious known files, but what will happen is those files like Eric uploaded will sit on the system waiting to be executed at a point in time. You need additional monitoring for that. We've got software that actually scans all of the files, not just things that are being executed, but it looks at the code base on those files, and it tells you this is a potential threat that you need to investigate. So it goes above and beyond traditional antivirus. It's additional monitoring tools that you need to put in place in addition to antivirus. It's a great question. Oh, and the other one, yes, Eric made another mention. We have what's called SOC, the Security Operations Center, and Security Information Event Management, or SIEM. We have services that monitor your environment 24 hours a day. So any files that come in, they monitor the logs on the firewall, on the desktops, on the servers, every piece of device on the network, and it's going to alert us when something looks malicious so that someone can dig into it. Having that additional layer, it is additional expense, but it's kind of, you layer security. You start with the basics, add more as you grow. So, other questions? That scare anyone too badly? Hopefully it's information that you treat with respect because it is legitimate threats. The stuff that Eric demonstrated, while he had it set up in his lab environment, took technical expertise. If you go subscribe to this service, it's a double click and they've got a video guide to show you how to do all that stuff. You don't have to be technical. If you guys decide you don't want to be in the legitimate business anymore, it's a way for you to go out and steal from people. All right, guys, I will turn it over. I know Jennifer's got some great information when it comes to the legal side. Definitely pay attention to that because that's the back half. You want to make sure that if you get into a scenario like this, you've got to have representation. Anything that DASI can do to help you guys, let us know. We've got a form there for you to fill out. If you want to take advantage of those offers, just turn it into one of the guys at the end of the seminar. Reach out to us via the website. Connell, thank you so much for allowing us to speak at your event. Thank you guys for your attentiveness. Appreciate you listening to cybersecurity, man. It's tough. So, thank you guys.
Thank you, Shane.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay, our next speaker is Jennifer Mueller. Jennifer is with Baird Leitner Millsap and primarily practices employment law. Ms. Mueller has experience representing employers in every aspect of litigation and provides employer trainings in the area of anti-harassment and discrimination. In addition to these employer trainings, Ms. Mueller is responsible for providing tailored counseling and advice to business clients and appears regularly in state and federal court. She is a member of the Missouri Bar Association and the Springfield Metropolitan Bar Association. Ms. Mueller received her BS, summa cum laude, from Missouri State University and her JD from Creighton University, where she was on the editorial staff of the Creighton Law Review and a member of the Moot Court Board. Please help us in welcoming Ms. Jennifer Mueller.
You guys will have to wait for sanitize. I always hate the introduction part. And I think it's appropriate. Some would say I got a BS and I became a lawyer. So that works out well. I am happy to be here today. Let me do one quick slide. All right, we're good. When this was scheduled back in April, quite honestly, we had no idea what this would look like. And I was like, well, go ahead and put it down on the calendar. We'll see what happens. And here we are. And I think really no one knows still what is happening here. So I heard the last speaker scared you guys. And I am supposed to be the more lighthearted one, which is kind of a funny position to be in, to be talking about employment law and COVID, because I was actually speaking with a friend of mine when I was driving down, and she's like, give him a great motivational speak. And I'm like, frankly, there is nothing motivational about what I am talking about today. She's like, well, give him a great informative one. And I'm like, well, let's hope for that and see what that can happen. It's been a heck of a few 6 months, right? Everyone who's working in HR is nodding their head going, oh yeah, and it's not over yet. And we really don't know what's going to happen. So with that in mind, the first thing I had was this that I saw on Facebook of all places. And I can't believe we stayed up and screamed Happy New Year for this mess. And it's true. And kind of a funny personal story, I was actually on a cruise on New Year's Eve and New Year's Day this year. I am not much of a New Year's kind of person. It's like, yeah, I'll stay up till midnight, but it's a Dick Clark holiday in my mind. But there really was no better place to spend this Dick Clark holiday than on a cruise ship. I'd highly recommend it. It was great. Not that you can do it now. I came back on January 4th. I had no idea those 4 days are probably going to be the best 4 days that I'm going to have this year because, frankly, I don't see anything on the horizon that's going to make it a whole heck of a lot better. But it is what it is, and we're going to go through it. But I think a lot of people share this sentiment of, gosh, we need to get done with 2020, and we need to move on somehow and see what's going to happen. So 2020 is the year that keeps on giving, especially in employment law. Got a lot of new things in which we can talk about and what's going on. Here's what we are going to cover today. And let me tell you up front, do I have all the answers to everything? Absolutely not. There's a lot of things that are still in flux, things that are fluid, things that we are still working out. And it's going to be an ongoing process. But here are the big topics we're going to look at. We're going to look at the Families First Coronavirus Relief Act, or just the act, and things that we are still currently seeing with that. We're going to talk briefly about the executive orders that came out on August 8th so that we can just add more confusion to everyone's lives right now. Talk briefly about the CARES Act. We're going to talk about furloughs and reductions in pay. We're going to talk about policy issues that you may be dealing with now that are related to COVID, things specifically related to travel, masking, testing, and remote work. We're going to talk about those return to work issues for people who aren't all yet back to work. We're going to talk about liability and waivers from the employer's perspective. Also going to talk about medical marijuana issues, which is not necessarily COVID, but when this was getting set up, that was a topic I was told that there's a lot of questions on right now. Seeing a lot of nods of heads there. So we're going to talk some about that. Also going to talk about documentation. I did have to chuckle. That was kind of the thing that was billed on the sign up. And it's like, well, okay, we can throw in that. That one's much easier probably than every other current issue in which we are talking about. And then I'm just going to touch briefly on what else may be on the horizon. What other issues are we going to see as we finish out this year and go over into the next year and what we'll be dealing with in employment law. So let's talk first about the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, or just the act, to say it a lot simpler. As if you all didn't have enough to deal with when everything was going downhill very quickly in March and April, we have this new act that you have to learn about and have to figure out how it's going to relate to your workplace. I was in the same boat. It was brand new for me as well. I'm having clients calling me about it. I'm having to get educated quickly, when at that point, I'm not even working in the office. All of you had the same issues. I know that you were dealing with it. And we got through it very early on. Now, technically, as you will see, this law is still in effect until the end of the year. Is it going to be extended? Is a question that I often get. Here's my answer. I have no idea. That's the best honest answer that I can give you. When people always ask me questions that kind of require speculation, as I call it, my answer is always, well, if I had a crystal ball, I wouldn't be here because I would have won the lottery a long time ago. And I would be down in a Caribbean island right now, not dealing with any of this mess. So I really don't know. And let's be honest, we've got a presidential election in November. And is a lot of that going to be affected by the outcome of the election, both for the president's race and also for the congressional race? Of course it is. So can I give you any honest speculation as to how that may go? Sure can't. But all we know right now is that this is going to be in effect through the end of the year. Is there a good likelihood that it could potentially be extended? Probably, because I think there are some aspects of it that could be extended, because let's be honest, we're not going to be past everything by the end of the year. Just last night, I was seeing Kansas City extended their mask ordinance over until January of 2021. They're not going to be the only city doing something like that. So we're going to still be seeing this, and we're going into a regular flu season. So we've got a lot of issues that we're going to be dealing with in the next couple months. So short answer, December 31, is it likely to be extended? If I was a betting woman, which I am, I would say yes. It's going to be extended in some way, shape, or form. In its entirety, probably not. But I think there will be things that will be cherry-picked in order for it to be extended. Remember that this generally applies to employers with fewer than 500 employees. That's most of you, quite honestly. Obviously, we have some larger employers within the area in Southwest Missouri, but the vast majority of people, this is falling under to them, under the 500. Now, for those of you who are larger than 500 employees, is it a good idea to stick your head in the sand and say, I'm not going to worry about any of these issues that are out there? Probably not. Just because you're still dealing with them, you're just dealing with them on a larger scale to some extent by the number of your employees. And so you really need to stop and think, all right, the law may not specifically apply to me, but how are we responding to these same issues? But for the vast majority of you sitting here today, it's going to apply to you. Remember that your part-time employees are also going to be eligible for this, and that's going to be based on how many hours that they work. So it's not a simple situation where you can say, oh, I'm only looking at my full-time. You got to be looking at your part-time employees also. It was designed to cover a lot of people. Now, all of you have probably seen this by now. This is not brand new information, but I think it is good information to still go over. What is the act actually covering? What are we looking at here? And there are 6 different bases under the act in which there can be some sort of paid leave. First one, and everything is the employee is subject to a federal, state, or local quarantine or isolation order related to COVID-19. We aren't seeing as many of these now as we were when the act was first passed. Different cities, different municipalities had their own ordinances at the time that were basically the lockdown orders. So a lot of those have expired, especially in our area. Nationwide, not necessarily so, but here in Southwest Missouri, most of those are gone, but that's what this was initially applying to. Number 2, the employee has been advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine related to COVID-19. We're still seeing a lot of that, and we're probably seeing more of that now than we were back in April. Why? Because we were all locked down back in April. We weren't out. Are our numbers all going up everywhere in Southwest Missouri? Of course they are. So with contact tracing, if you get contacted by the health department, there's a very good possibility you may be put under an order in which you have to self-quarantine. And the time for that quarantine amount is it's in flux right now. It always had kind of been 14 days. CDC had recently said 10 days as about a week or 2 ago. They said it really could be cut down to 10. But I think 14 days is still in everybody's mind as the potential exposure period and when the actual symptoms would show up if you were going to test positive. Number 3, the employee is experiencing COVID-19 symptoms and seeking a medical diagnosis. A lot more of this now also, because again, testing has gone up, positivity rates have gone up, exposures have gone up everywhere in Southwest Missouri. So if you don't know someone already who has been tested for COVID, I'm surprised. Let me say that, because I know several people who have been tested for COVID. If you don't know someone yet who has COVID or has a family member with COVID, I could say, well, that may still be a possibility, but your day's coming. I will say for me personally, within the last week and a half, the number of people I know who have family members with COVID and are having serious health issues related to it is skyrocketed. It's just like all of a sudden it is here and it's closing in. And I think the numbers reflect that as well. So this deals with the employee who is having those symptoms and is waiting for that test. Testing can take time, and depending on where you get your test at can affect how long it takes to get your results as well. So we're talking about, and I'm kind of jumping ahead of myself here, of that 14 days pay of waiting for that. Springfield, I can say it's usually running about 72 hours if you're going to one of the healthcare facilities to get your results. If you go somewhere else like your Walgreens or your CVS, those sorts of things, that can take weeks because they're using outside labs. So there's a big variety on how long are we looking at for someone having to deal with this. And we're going to talk about this point here more in a moment. Number 4, the employee is caring for an individual subject to an order described in 1 or self-quarantine described in 2. So for example, if you have a child who lives at home with you and is needing someone to be at home with them, but they're subject to that order, they need someone there to take care of them. If you're dealing with health issues, obviously they may need a caregiver as well. All right, number 5, the employee is caring for his or her child whose school or place of care is closed or child care provider is unavailable due to COVID-19 related reasons. We're going to talk about this one a little bit more here in a second as well, but when this first went into effect back in April, obviously most schools were closed and it was sudden. I remember having the conversation with my daughter's principal about a week and a half, and I told her, I'm like, you don't know me particularly well, you know me, but I'm a smart aleck, I'll tell you that. And I was saying to her, I'm like, everyone's saying on the news I should be asking my principal or, the school, what's your plan? What are you doing? And, a week and a half later, granted, we were getting ready to go out on spring break, but we never went back after spring break. And by that point, the writing was on the wall. They were saying, we think we're going back, and I'm thinking you're delusional. There's no way we're going back. So that number 5 was a big shock to a lot of employees right off the bat, because suddenly you have kids who are typically in school and legally supposed to be in school, not in school, and school has become the couch or the kitchen table. Add on top of that, you've got parents who are then at home, and the office is now the home. I can speak for that personal experience. My office was at home. My husband began working at home, and my daughter was doing school at home. It was all very quick. And so this one was dealing with those employees who suddenly don't have a way to take care of their children because the school's not there anymore. And especially for the younger children who can't stay home for school, quote unquote, that's happening on their kitchen table. And then finally, you gotta love the catch-all ones, is experiencing any other substantially similar condition specified by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. It's like, well, we put this together quickly. Let's add the catch-all, so when we can't think of something that does come up, guess what? We've got number 6. Has anything really been coming out of number 6? Not so much, because we're seeing it getting covered in the other ones. But that was intentionally designed to be very broad and be a way and a mechanism for the government and our employers to go back and say, hey, we've got this whole new other situation. All right, let's throw it in under number 6. So those are the basis for leave that's going to be covered under the Act, still going to be covered under the Act again till December 31st. And I have one last note there, glad I didn't click on. Remember that these apply to employees who are unable to work, and that includes telework. So if you are able to work remotely and your employee is able to work remotely, and nothing has really changed other than the workplace is now the kitchen table as opposed to your work site, the leave doesn't apply. These are going to apply to individuals who work jobs who can't transfer those jobs to their home or to some other remote location. If I work in retail, I'm not able to work remotely. And so these leave provisions are going to apply. But for someone like me who has a desk job, I can just take my desk elsewhere and take my laptop elsewhere. So I wouldn't be able to request leave in theory under these because I am able to work, including telework. All right, generally speaking, I always like saying generally speaking, it leaves the gray area there to go back. But generally speaking, your covered employers must provide employees up to 2 weeks or 80 hours or a part-time employee's 2-week equivalent, so whatever they may work. So if you typically have someone who works 20 hours a week, then we're talking 40 hours. That's their 2-week equivalent of paid sick leave based on the higher of their regular rate of pay or the applicable state or federal minimum wage, paid at, because we just can't make it easy, we got to have different levels and percentages. First of all, it's 100% for qualifying reasons number 1 and 3, up to $511 daily or $5,110 total. So I'm going to go back just a few so you guys can see. Remember 1 through 3 is the subject to a quarantine, has been advised to self-quarantine, or is experiencing those symptoms. So that is what's going to get you that 100% pay up to those certain capped amounts that are listed there. All right, for reasons 4 and 6, I'll bounce back again. Remember, number 4 is caring for someone. Number 6 is the catch-all that really isn't being used. You get 2/3 of that rate of pay, up to $200 daily and $2,000 total. So you're getting a different rate of pay. And then if you talk about number 5, which is the school-related reason or the child care-related reason, you can take up to 12 weeks of paid sick leave and expanded family and medical leave paid at 2/3 of that rate of pay, up to $200 daily and up to $12,000 total. So, let's, in these times, let's make it even really harder instead of just saying this is what it is. Let's say it's different for different reasons. And heaven forbid you have somebody who qualifies under different reasons that would qualify for them for different rate of pay, because then you're going to need to figure out, well, what rate of pay am I paying them under for what qualifying reason, and what are we calling the qualifying reason? So hopefully, if it comes down to it, you just have the one reason and aren't having to figure it out. So what are we really kind of seeing issues at currently? These are the two that I get the most calls on, and I'm seeing some nods of the head, so I'm guessing that's what you all are dealing with as well. Because frankly, we are at a point where we're kind of past that initial shock time. We're past the time where most people aren't working at their place of work. Some people haven't, but in our area, for the most part, a lot of people are back to the work site. And we were in summertime, so that took care of some of the school issue as well, because school normally wouldn't have been in session during summer unless you elected to go to summer school. So here's where I'm seeing the issues that my clients are facing. Number 3 is experiencing COVID-19 symptoms and is seeking a medical diagnosis. This is a tough one. It's tough. Because if you look at that laundry list of what the symptoms are for COVID-19, it can cover just about anything under the sun. And they continue to expand that list as to what is other recognized symptoms of COVID-19. All of those symptoms are the exact same things as what many people would normally get. Allergies, seasonal flu, just your general crud going around. I know several people who had the symptoms who were tested, and they were negative, fortunately, which just led me to believe, at least up in the Springfield area, there was some sort of crud going around. And it mimics the symptoms of COVID. So there you are, as an employee, trying to figure out, well, what do I have? And I know early on, I'm probably not the only one, and I'm a little germophobic, I'll admit it. But I'm not the only one who's randomly taking temperature, at various points. Everyone's nodding head, when I'm stuck at home for 6 weeks, really, frankly, what else do I have to do? Oh, let's see what my temperature is today and what it may be. But then you get into the seasonal allergies as well, and you're left guessing, is a scratch in my throat? Is that just the usual mold and pollen and everything, or is it something more? You don't know. And so, the employee gets paranoid, and nobody, I think, really wants to go and risk exposing people and then have to go back and say, yeah, I knew I had those symptoms and I still came to work. The employer really doesn't want the employee there if they have those symptoms, but the employer also doesn't want to let the employee off every single time you've got the dry cough, or if you've got the sneeze, whatever the symptom may be that you're taking off the COVID list. So this is where I'm seeing employers are having a hard time balancing, what do we do? What do we do? My advice in most situations is if someone is experiencing those symptoms, they need to go get the test. And then you need to wait for them to get the test results. And then it's very clearly going to fall in under that number 3, and they're going to need to be paid for that time under number 3. But frankly, do you want to be that employer that hits the news that they say, oh yeah, we knew our employee had some symptoms, or we knew our employee was waiting test results and we still had them come back to work? You probably don't want that publicity, because it's not good publicity. And so that's where you kind of have to work through with each of them. Are there going to be people who take advantage of this? Of course, because there's people who take advantage of any type of leave situation. But I think those numbers are fewer and far between. And when you're telling someone you've got to go get a COVID test, frankly, it's not a pleasant test. So that may deter some people from saying, hey, yeah, I'm going to try to get the leave under this if you need to go get that COVID test. The other issue I'm still seeing with my clients is number 5, related to the child care and to the schools. And I think this is going to be a big issue in the next month because going back to school is here. And it's taking various forms in various school districts in our area. And school supposedly is quote unquote open, even if it's a virtual option. So to some extent, in my mind, even though there's not a lot of guidance on it, you kind of lose that exception because the school is open. But what do you do with the employee who has the small child who, say, has a 6-year-old who is doing virtual school, who can't stay home alone? You know, and what are the other child care options available? For anyone who's from Springfield or follows Springfield Public Schools, it was a big shock to a lot of parents that the seated option was only going to be 2 days a week. I can tell you exactly when it went out. Getting a signal and I'm not sure what I should do. Okay. You know, it was a big shock as to what do we do? Because we thought our kid was going to be seated 5 days a week, and now our kid's seated only 2 days a week. And there's a lot of nonprofits and different organizations in Springfield that are trying to fill those gaps, so that may take the need out for that sort of leave. But I think employers are going to have to look at some flexibility for their employees, especially for that first month or two going back to school, because we don't know what this is going to look like. And then let's be honest, how long is the school going to stay open? You know, my daughter is going back to a 5-day seated option next Thursday. I have no idea if that seated option is going to last 2 weeks, 2 months, or if we're going to make it through to the school year. I don't know if there's going to be closings at some point for some periods of time, and then we will be going back. No one knows. And unfortunately, your employees aren't going to know either until it hits them, until it's right there, until you get that notice as a parent saying, guess what? You're not coming back to school tomorrow. So the employers need to keep in mind that there may still be some need for leave under that if the child care facilities aren't available or if the schools close back down. Now, for those who are on a full virtual option, will the school technically ever close? I don't know. Depends on what it looks like and what it's going to be, and no one knows, and that's the problem. So these are where I am seeing kind of the 2 main issues still coming out of the act, and that may continue to be fluid over the next couple months. Something else, if we get back to more quarantine orders, that may be a bigger issue as well. Gonna shift some gears, and I'm going to talk about the executive orders that were signed by President Trump on August 8th. Let me tell you up front, I don't have good answers for you. I don't know a whole lot. I know probably about as much as you do. I had a client, I'm going to pick on one right here, came up and asked me a question before I even started speaking about it. My honest answer is I don't know on a lot of this stuff because nobody knows. It's still getting worked out. And the executive orders aren't the best way necessarily for some of these things to be happening, and we don't have a lot of guidance yet on it. So the best advice I can give up front, especially for things that are related to payroll, is to talk to your payroll company, to talk to your accountant, to talk to someone who is much smarter on those sorts of things than I am, because I don't deal with payroll at all in the practical sense of how it's actually done. And we really don't know how it's all going to still come about and how it's going to work. So the 4 executive orders that were signed back on the 8th, the first one is the delay of the payroll tax collection for those earning less than $4,000 every 2 weeks, which is under $104,000 annually. That's going to cover a vast majority of the employees for people who are sitting here. What does that look like? I don't know. I don't think anybody really knows. And I bet there are some payroll company people out there who are like, oh, great, thank you, helpful. But, you know, in terms of, do we actually have to do it? Are we going to be delaying it? Yeah, It's the best answer I can give you. We really don't have a whole lot of guidance yet. And granted, we're at August 14th today, so, you know, we're almost a week out from these orders. But there's still a lot to be worked out in terms of how that is going to happen. The unemployment benefits are extended at $400 a week, which is supposed to be $300 from the federal government and $100 from the state government. If you've watched the news at all within the past couple days, which I don't know if that's good advice anymore or not, but if you have, you're probably seeing there's already a whole lot of questions on this and whether the states are going to elect to participate, because a lot of the states are saying we don't even have the money to do this in the first place. And now you're looking to get an extra extension of the $100 coming from us for employees. There's no guarantee that that's going to be coming from the states. And in terms of the money of how it is going to be distributed and those sorts of things, there's still a lot to be worked out there. But in theory, that is what the executive order stated. The Health and Human Services and the CDC director to consider whether an eviction ban is needed. Currently, there is no applicable law in Missouri regarding eviction bans. We are one of the states that does not have some. Different states have enacted different laws as all of this has been going on since back in March and April, dealing with evictions and whether they could happen. I can speak for Greene County. Initially, when all of this started in March and April, it was very clear from our presiding judge in Greene County that evictions weren't going to be happening, just as a matter of course, because the courts weren't open. What the courts were letting us hear in terms of actual hearings by phone and stuff were things that absolutely had to be done. And most of the time it was related to criminals' rights in terms of what had to occur within the criminal process. So basically nothing was happening. There wasn't service happening in terms for new lawsuits that were being filed. Some of the courts weren't accepting new lawsuits to be filed. So there was a whole period of time where evictions weren't going to be happening, at least up in Greene County, Missouri, because the mechanisms to make that happen weren't open, couldn't occur. So the courts are now back open, and in theory, it could be happening here in Missouri. But this executive order, if you look at it, is to consider whether a ban is necessary. That doesn't mean a ban has been put in place. It doesn't mean a ban will be put in place. It just means I'm going to have these people talk about it to see if a ban should be put in place. We'll see where that goes. But as of now, there is no ban and there is no state law in Missouri related to the ban. The last executive order that was signed relates to student loans. Student loans have been a hot topic throughout all of this, and in terms of any relief acts as to whether there should be forgiveness of some extent on principal and or interest, that sort of thing. This executive order deals only with the student loan interest payments, and it is only by loans that are held by the federal government. So what that says is that the student loan interest payments on the loans will be deferred until the end of the year. It doesn't mean that the loan's being forgiven. It doesn't mean it doesn't have to be paid. It's just saying that the interest is deferred until the end of the year. So that is the only scope of that executive order. So there is still, as I said, a lot of unknowns that we have, and I think most employers are probably concerned with the first two up on there. Number one probably being the biggest concern. Hopefully we'll get some guidance. We'll get some better ideas as to what employers absolutely have to do, how it's going to work, how we're going to do it, and frankly for employees as well, what may need to be paid back. Just because we are not if we're delaying those payroll taxes, some things I have read said we're still going to have to pay it at some point. And so that may be our January present of congratulations, you all have to pay this over on your taxes, but no one knows. It's still in flux. So something that you need to work with people who are going to know once you can be in the know on that. The CARES Act, I'm going to touch on this just very briefly. I think it's an interesting dilemma for me as an attorney as to how much do I get into the CARES Act, because a lot of the CARES Act deals with the financial side of things. I don't regularly advise my clients on anything related to loans and that sort of stuff. But do I recognize that some of that plays over into employment? Of course it does. Because, for example, under the PPP, the whole design of that was to keep your employees employed for a period of time. And so if you have one of those loans, you better make sure you know what the terms of those loans are from the bank in which you sourced it from, so that if you do need to consider letting employees go, even in just the ordinary course of business, discipline issues haven't stopped just because we're in the era of COVID. And employees still sometimes need to be terminated for reasons unrelated to COVID, but related to performance. And when I speak with my clients about that, I always have to tell them, make sure you go back and look at the terms of that loan you got to make sure that you're not going to mess up the possible forbearance of that loan by letting an employee go for something that's not even related to COVID. And so usually whoever is servicing that loan can give you some pretty good advice on that. I'm married to an accountant. So when we were stuck at home working together, I was only home for 6 weeks, he was home for a little bit longer. Where was his focus at? It was all basically in here, because for the employer that he was working for, this really hit big. For me, it's kind of a tangential. So you need to make sure you know who you're working with, that you get that advice on how it's working. So what was the CARES Act designed for? Because it was passed at the same time as the Family First Coronavirus Relief Act. And here's what the Treasury Department will say was the goals. First of all, it was to provide assistance for workers and the families. Vast majority of people got their money from the federal government, stimulus type money, to come in to give that immediate relief. So that was the first stated goal. The second was the assistance for small businesses, the PPP. You would have to be living under a rock to not know that there was not a lot of issues with that. And a lot of employers ran into problems of trying to apply for that money. More money is still out there. It was extended. Recently saw something, I think about a week ago, with the deadline that was last week, but there was still money there. But I don't think a lot of employers knew that at that point, that there was a second kind of influx of cash in which they could go back and try to apply for again. Preserving jobs and the assistance for state, local, or tribal governments. So all of this together, the CARES Act and the Relief Act for the families, were designed to try to cover things immediately for the workers, because all of us were found suddenly in that situation where we're not working in some extent. So those are how the two go hand in hand. Let's talk for a minute about furloughs and reductions in pay. I don't know about you guys, but back in March and April, this was basically all I was dealing with. And these were all the calls that I was getting from my clients. And as if it wasn't depressing enough for everything that was just generally going on, I knew everything I was working on was affecting people who was losing their jobs. It was a pretty depressing time in terms of the work that I do. Back in March and April, because I have clients who are having to let employees go and having to make those decisions of, once we let them go, are they ever even really coming back? And those are hard decisions, and some of those still haven't even been fully made because people don't know for sure of what it's going to be and what the economy is going to look like, what the workforce is going to look like for each individual job. So what we saw a lot of was a lot of conversations about furloughs and layoffs. Furloughs technically imply, from a legal sense, not that you're going to get yourself in trouble if you use it wrong, but furloughs typically imply the employee's coming back. I'm going to need to furlough you for a period of time, 8 weeks, so that we can save some money. We aren't open. We're not providing the services, but we fully anticipate after 8 weeks, we're going to be able to reopen. Your job's going to be here, and you're going to need to come back. Whereas a layoff implies the job's gone. You're not coming back. We're having to let you go. We don't anticipate there is going to be work for you again. There is a chance that you may be recalled down the road, but it's not a real certain possibility. And so we're letting you go in terms of a layoff. You can call these things however you want, But it all came down to how do you communicate it to your employee? And that's a lot of what I was assisting clients with during that time, is letters out to employees. Are we having the expectation they're going to come back? Can we tell them we are closed through this date, but assuming no change in any ordinances, we're going to be back on this date and your job will be here? And are we paying you for any period of time during that furlough period? What are we going to do with that here? A lot of employers, fortunately, are past that now because a lot of employers are back to work in some capacity. But does that mean all of their employees have actually come back to work? No, because not all of employers have enough work for all the employees that they previously had. So are we done with the furloughs? Are we done with the layoffs? Probably not, because it's going to be an ongoing situation for employers to decide who can we pay, who can we afford to pay, and do we have enough return in business for this to happen? Only advice I can probably give here is really try to communicate with your employees. I don't think any employer likes to say, we may lose jobs, you may lose a job. But from the employee's perspective, wouldn't they rather know, I may not have a job in a few weeks, and so I know whether I can go on? It's a lot of uncertainty for the employee who's trying to decide what decisions can I make. So granted, I understand there are some things you can't tell your employees, and frankly, you may not know all the answers of what you may want to tell your employees. But you do need to, when you can, tell them what you can so they know where they're at and what expectations there may be. Reducing pay for non-exempt employees, that was also another issue. We may be able to afford and keep our employees here, but I can't keep them all at the same rate of pay. Can you reduce the pay of a non-exempt employee? Yes, you can. Does that make for great morale? It doesn't. But when faced with the I will lose $1 an hour versus I will lose my job, a lot of employees are understanding to be able to say, yeah, I'd rather keep my job than, at a lower rate than to lose my job in its entirety. One thing employers need to keep in mind, however, is that if you're going to reduce the pay of an employee, there is a Missouri statute that requires 30 days notice. And I think it's a statute that a lot of people don't know about. It has very minimal teeth to it. I'm not encouraging you to ignore it, but the penalties for it that go along with it aren't huge, which is why I think a lot of employers don't know about it. But if you do need to do a reduction in pay for your employees or for any employee, you need to make sure that you are giving that employee the 30 days notice that it is going to happen. And give it to them in writing so that there is no doubt that they know they have received notice that as of, let's say, September 30th, my pay is going to be whatever it is going to be, and it's going to be reduced. Issues related to the exempt employees. Paying exempt employees is hard anyways, right? Because if they do any sort of work during that pay period for any sort of time, they got to be paid for the full pay period, right? Kind of just a basic under the Fair Labor Standards Act. So a lot of employers I know were grappling early on with, what do we do with these individuals that we maybe need to not pay them for a while? Because we can't tell the exempt the exempt employee to be able to say, hey, don't come into work on Tuesday, and we just won't pay you for Tuesday, and we'll save some money there. The only way you can really work around that is for someone to have to take off a period of time for that pay period. So if I'm paid on a 2-week period, you could basically tell me you don't get to work for 2 weeks. And if I'm not performing any work during that 2-week period, I don't have to be paid for that 2 weeks. And then I come back after that 2-week period and my job is still there. And some of that may be ongoing cycles for employers, especially if they have a lot of those employees, to say, hey, we've got some that are working for this period, some that are working for this period, but you've got to make certain that the employee performs 0 work during that period. Because again, under the Fair Labor Standards Act, if they perform any work at all in the slightest amount, they've got to be paid for the entire pay period. So you've got to make sure that you are enforcing that as an employer, that we are not doing any work during this time. And that means not answering any emails, not looking at my phone, not taking any quick phone calls, anything like that. If you get into a situation as an employer and you're a larger employer and you're going to fit in under the criteria and you're going to have a mass layoff, you got to remember the WARN Act. The WARN Act hasn't gone anywhere. Now, I will say back in March and April, especially when there was a lot of layoffs going on, there was a lot of questions of, is the WARN Act going to apply? Because there is an exception to the notice under the WARN Act, and I'm paraphrasing here so no one quotes me, but it's basically for an unforeseen circumstance that you can't reasonably give notice because you didn't know this was coming. And I can dare say most employers probably never didn't know this was coming to the extent that it came. And so the question was, if we get into these situations of mass layoffs, is the WARN Act really going to apply? And that, of course, has not been tested in the courts. I personally, I'm pretty conservative in the advice that I give, just because I don't want my employers to invite more trouble than they need. I would say if you're in that situation, follow through with the WARN notice, because then you don't have to get into a legal battle of whether that exception applies. And that's going to save you some money down the road, because then if you get the challenge as to whether the exception applies, guess what? You're spending the money that you probably would have spent for those 60 days anyways for those employees to continue working, to be fighting over whether the exception applied or not. And there's a lot of different opinions out there as to whether that exception will apply, but nobody knows because we haven't seen it go through the courts. I'm going to turn my attention to some of the issues that I'm seeing employers have with policy issues related to COVID. And you saw my list earlier on. And the first one that we have up is travel policies. Many employers have asked me, this is a question I am getting a lot of, should we prohibit our employees from traveling? And if we are going to prohibit them from traveling, are we going to allow them to travel but then have to quarantine when they come back? How are we going to treat it? Let me start by saying I hate travel policies related to COVID-19. I have a bias against them. I'm going to make it full known right here. I hate them because I think they're impractical. And I think they invite a lot more trouble for the employer to try to enforce them than they actually do any good. Now, when travel policies first came up initially, most people, well, I shouldn't say most people, back then, there were designated hotspots within the United States. Let's pick on New York City for a second. But that has changed. And obviously, we have different hotspots now, Arizona, Florida, any other number of states. Frankly, Missouri is getting on the radar of some people and have made some states hotspots list. I traveled, I did travel, so maybe that's why I hate the travel policies. I traveled last week. One of the states I went to was Ohio. And Ohio, every Wednesday, will add states to their list of which Ohioans are not supposed to travel to. And or if you're traveling from that state, it's recommended that you quarantine. Now, in Ohio, it's only a recommendation, so it wasn't a requirement. But I was watching it in preparation, and we were only going to be in Ohio for maybe 36 hours on our way on to somewhere else. But they updated the list every week. And they do it on a rolling 7-day positivity number. And so I was watching Missouri's number. And if you hit 15%, that's when you hit Ohio's list. So 1 week, it was 10% for Missouri. I'm like, okay, we're good. Next week, 13%. That was the Wednesday before we left. Unfortunately, we traveled on a Sunday, and we left on a Monday. So I'm like, all right, we're in the clear. Nobody's going to be looking at our Missouri plates because they're not going to review this again. And I was surprised. I did look out of curiosity. Missouri's numbers did go back down, according to Ohio. So we wouldn't have hit it because I'm like, I think Missouri might hit Ohio's list right after we leave. So all of that being said, I've gotten off on a tangent here. But all of that being said, trying to figure out where you do or don't want your employees to travel to is tough to figure out. And frankly, here's another reason why I hate the travel policies. I don't know that travel necessarily increases the risk more so than me staying here in Springfield. I could do any number of activities up where I live in Springfield or down here in Branson that could be potentially just as risky if you're looking at the risk reward as traveling. Now, when we traveled, we did it as smartly as we could. We took a lot of precautions. But, you know, tonight's Friday night, and none of you are going to believe this, but, you know, hey, I could go out to the club tonight. I could go out to the bar. Is that deemed a pretty risky activity in terms of potential exposure? It absolutely is. I'm not doing that, but you guys can laugh at that image, at the thought of me out in middle age at the club on Friday night. But, you know, there are plenty of people of your employees who will go out to the bar, who will go out to the restaurants, who will go wherever, and that increases their risk. Sunday is a couple days away. Church services. Those are a known high-risk activity depending on how the church is conducting the service and what the social distancing is. Is church any less risky or more risky than traveling? I don't know. I'm not a scientist. But that's why I come back to I hate the travel policies, because I think it just singles out one particular activity that you're not singling out other activities. You're not telling your employees don't go to the bars and stay there till closing time and be sitting right next to your best friend drinking and say that's not a risky activity. So all of that being said, I could have said it very shortly, I hate travel policies. Doesn't mean employers don't want them. So if you still want to have a travel policy, here are some things that I think you need to keep in mind and to kind of work through so that you can actually develop a policy that may work for you as an employer. First of all, you got to figure out, what are you hoping to accomplish? Obviously, you're probably hoping to accomplish that you decrease the risk of exposure from different people. But how, you know, again, on the travel, are you going to really say, yep, we're going to be able to decrease that? What is our hope here? What will be the scope of the policy? That's a tough one to figure out. I know some employers have looked at mile radiuses, like you can't travel more than, say, 50 miles, can't travel more than 100 miles. Some go specify you can't travel to the designated hotspots as determined by the CDC at any particular time at your time of travel. And so if you are an employer who's going to have a travel policy, you're going to have to figure out what that scope is. You know, do you not want someone going up to the wedding in Bolivar because that may be more than beyond your scope? Or are you fine with them going to Bolivar, but you're not fine with them going to Kansas City? So you've really got to stop and think, where am I putting those parameters at? And what am I using to justify those parameters? Because is traveling to, you know, Kansas City worse than traveling to a wedding of 300 people in Bolivar? I don't know. But you need to think what that scope is going to be. How will the policy be enforced? That's the next step. Who's going to be your travel police? And do you really want to designate someone in HR, most likely, to be able to say, hey, guess what? You now get to keep track of everyone who's traveling. So if somebody requests time off, are you going to require them to tell you what they are doing? Am I taking a week off from work so I can stay home and do some stuff around the house and do, you know, just get away from the office for a while? Or am I taking a week off so that I can travel halfway across the country? Am I going to require my employees to tell me that and what they are doing? Am I going to assume they're telling me the truth when they do that? I could say I'm staying home and just burning up my vacation time because I've got nothing else to do this year, when in reality, I'm traveling to New York City. Not that they're taking people from Missouri right now. So how are you going to enforce that? And when you find out that someone has, quote unquote, violated the policy, what's going to be the discipline that goes along with it? What are you going to do to them once you find out, hey, they either lied to me or they traveled further than what they should have? They shouldn't have traveled more than 100 miles and they went 125 miles. What are we going to do with that? all of you are looking at me like I have 3 heads, and I know you're thinking this is not worth it. So this is why I hate travel policy. So I'm hoping I'm persuading on you on that indirectly. But these are the things that you're really going to have to think about if you do decide you're going to have that policy. And then you have to decide what will be the quarantine period. So if you allow your employee to travel, so if you get past the point of just saying, we're not going to let you travel, or we're only going to let you travel so far, we're going to let you travel. But when you do travel, when you come back, you're going to have to stay and work from home for a period. And again, 14 days is the number that comes up with most people. May go down to 10 days with the latest CDC recommendation. So is your workplace able to do that? Is it capable of saying to someone, yep, you can go take that vacation, but then we're seriously going to expect you to work from home for the next 2 weeks to see if you have any symptoms develop and any exposure. Not something a lot of employers want to deal with again. And then how will the employee work during the quarantine period? I'm going to talk about remote work policies here in a second, but are you capable of actually being able to work from home? Hypothetically, if my employer had a travel policy, I could work from home for the next 2 weeks, and it wouldn't be that huge of a difference, but not all jobs are capable of that. So if you have a job that is not capable of that, are you then telling the employee, we're not paying you for that period of time because you elected to travel? And then take it back to the act and decide, is that a quote unquote quarantine order, which it's really not from a health department, but if you as an employer are telling your employee you have to stay home for 2 weeks, but we're not going to pay you, it has a whole lot of issues that go along with it. So if you are going to do one of these travel policies, which as you know, I would recommend you don't, you really got to stop and think it through of how it's going to work. Some places right now I know have travel policies that on their easiest form are saying no international travel. That's really easy right now because you know what? Americans can't go anywhere right now and nobody wants us. So it's very easy to say we're banning international travel. But if you put that into a policy, in theory, at some point, those travel bans against Americans are going to be lifted. So you better make sure you come back and look at that policy again when, say, Canada decides to let us back or Europe decides to let us come back, and then decide, is this still a travel ban that we are going to keep in place? And none of you are going to know the answer to that question because none of us know what's going to be the condition of all of this at that time when those travel bans are lifted against Americans. Masking. Oh, I could get a lot of people's blood pressure up with masking policies. I won't. I'm not going to discuss any political side of this one way or another, but as an employer, you certainly need to look at the issue. Because it's here. Whether you want to or not, it is here. And as I mentioned, Kansas City's just extended theirs. Springfield has theirs through October, and I think there's probably a good likelihood that will be extended as well. Branson's got theirs. Nixa voted theirs down. Ozark's looking. I mean, it's just everywhere. It is an issue. So as an employer, how do you handle it? Well, first and foremost, you got to give deferral to the state and local ordinances. There is no state ordinance currently in Missouri that affects masking statewide. So what are you looking at? You're looking at your local ordinances. And as a business, you better make sure that you're complying. Agree, not agree, whatever the situation may be, it's an enforceable ordinance. And I don't know that at this time, a lot of employers really want to be inviting that trouble over the issue. So beyond that, what is going to be the company's policy as to masking? As to both employees and to customers, how are we going to handle it? Because I can speak, for example, with the Springfield ordinance, it's required in most places, but when you get into private offices, like when I'm sitting in my own individual office, I don't have to wear my mask. But am I supposed to be wearing my mask when I'm out in the common areas and could be running into whoever? Yes, I am supposed to be. People who come into my office, are they supposed to have their mask on? Yes, they are supposed to by the ordinance. And so you as a company, in again, deferring to those state and local ordinances, need to make sure that you are conveying that to your employees and what is the expectation and what the law is as it's applicable. Now, if you are in an area that does not have a local ordinance related to masking, can you have a mask policy? Yes, of course you can. Any private employer can decide what are the restrictions, so long as they are not discriminatory restrictions, for people coming in and out of their building. You know, you tell people that they have to wear clothes when they come in, so if you want to tell them that they have to wear a mask when they come in, as a private employer who's not under any sort of state ordinance or local ordinance, you can do that. You can also elect to say, hey, we're not going to have this policy, and masks are not required. But whatever the decision is, assuming there is not an ordinance that is in effect related to it, you need to make sure that it's conveyed, that your employees know what the policy is, and also any customers or clients who are coming into your place of business, that they know what it is. I can guarantee every health department probably has the signs if you want to go pick them up. Springfield does, to be able to say, you know, masks are required. And you can definitely make your own. You know, you can set whatever those parameters are, but you just need to communicate whatever it is, if there is an actual masking policy that's in effect, if you're in that place that doesn't have the local ordinance. How will the policy be enforced? That is tough, because you can turn on the news any day of the week and you're seeing people who are getting assaulted over these masking policies. And who are the people who are facing the brunt of it? It's your employee who's gotten stuck standing by the door having to say, hey, do you have a mask on? I was in a store yesterday, you know, and people coming in, and of course there was the guy who was standing there, and he had to stop one and say, you know, to the person coming in, I was going out, ma'am, do you have something you can put up over your face? You know, because Springfield, it's required by city ordinance. But how do you protect your employees who are now becoming, frankly, the mask police? How are you going to deal with that? What kind of support are you giving to those employees who, frankly, probably don't want to be in that position? Obviously, there are employers who, I'm going to use Walmart as an example, because regardless of where you're at, you have to wear a mask into Walmart. It's the company policy. And I can at least speak for Springfield. I can't speak for here in Branson. But if you go up to Springfield to either a Walmart or to a neighborhood market, there's hired security outside of the store, making sure that you have your mask on. And then you don't encounter an employee until you go in next for like a neighborhood market for your shopping cart, because they're the ones who are cleaning the carts. And so as an employer, you have to stop and think, all right, does that serve me better to hire a third party to come in and enforce that policy, as opposed to putting my employee potentially at risk for having to enforce that? So all of that being said, you've just got to stop and think through, how are we going to handle this issue, whichever way we're going to come down on it, and how are we going to communicate that to both our customers and to our employees? Testing and privacy issues. I had my temperature taken when I got here. I don't know if you all did also. Yep, yeah. I've had my temperature taken elsewhere. I think we all know you can take temperatures however much you want. Places of businesses can decide we're taking temperatures. Is it effective or not? I don't know. Yeah, there's things that say it both ways. But there is no doubt, as an employer, if you want to take your employee's temperature when they come to work or at other period of time, you can do it. It's allowed. Very clearly stated, that is been out in the guidance. You can take an employee temperature. What do you do with that information? And where are you drawing the line? 100.4 is typically the number that is recommended, that is being deemed a temperature. And so that's a pretty easy number to go with, because that's what we're seeing from the CDC. Are you recording this information for your employees to show that you did it? You can. If you keep that, is that now a medical record? Sure is. Do you need to keep it in any other form, every other form as you would every other medical record that you have for that employee? Sure do. You need to make sure that there's still a confidentiality and the privacy provisions that go along with it. And it doesn't matter just the fact that you're taking your temperature. In lieu of having temperature taken at the door coming in, can you require your employees to submit their temperature in some way, shape, or form? Sure can. Woman I work with, her husband is required before he comes to work. They've got a thing that they have to go in, take their temperature, enter what their temperature is, and I think they get it taken again a second time later in the day. So yes, you can do all of that. You just got to make sure you are keeping that information confidential, and it is on a need-to-know basis. Once you get to someone who is at 104, are you enforcing that policy of sending them home? If you're going to have the policy, you better enforce it, because what's the point of having it if you're going to say, you're fine? Are you going to offer a second means of how to take the temperature? You could, because let's be honest, these forehead checks are not very accurate either direction. Dave took my temperature, I don't know where he's at, and I came in very low, and I was joking, am I alive? I know that's a common joke over at the Greene County Courthouse right now, is it seems like temperatures are running very low when they get taken. And no one's concerned if you're low. I mean, I guess you could be at 95 and nobody cares so long as you're below the 100.4, even though I'd probably be in serious health conditions if I was at the 95 on the other extreme there. So as an employer, if you're going to have that policy, you need to make sure that you're enforcing it and sending that employee home. And then have something in place to tell the employee, what do you do? You know, all right, so you send me home. Am I going to have to go get tested? Am I going to have to go see my private physician? Am I going to have to wait until I don't have a temp, you know, the next day? For your customers, if you're deciding to do that, you better make sure you're enforcing it as well. I have a friend very early on after all the stuff started opening back up. She went to get a pedicure. Her temperature was 100.9. because they were taking temperatures. And they're like, let's take it again. And they're like, we're sorry, we can't. They at least said, we can't let you in. She's like, I totally understand. But she's also like, I know what it feels like when I have a fever. And I know I don't feel like. She goes, I went home. I take my temperature, you know, through the oral method instead. I don't have a fever. I don't have a fever. She works in healthcare. So she did get a COVID test. It was negative. But all an example of those readings aren't real positive or aren't real accurate. And so how are you going to deal with that for the employee who is showing that they have 100.1, or excuse me, 101 or 100.9 or whatever the situation may be. So if you're going to do it, make sure you've got the follow through figured out as well. And also stop and think, do I want to do it? You know, it shows a picture in time as to whether someone may have a temperature or not. But it doesn't necessarily give you the complete health picture. So just stop and think of that. Policies for when an employee is awaiting COVID test results. Obviously, under the Act, the employee can be paid if they are seeking medical care or awaiting results. So hopefully that's an incentive for people to stay home. But as a practical matter, have you conveyed that to your employees? Do they know what to do once they are, you know, like, all right, I gotta go get a COVID test? Do they know who to tell at your place of business that I'm going to be out until I get those test results? And then when they do get the test results, are you requiring them to submit them so that you can show, yeah, I actually have a negative test or I have a positive test, as opposed to just verbally conveying it to someone of, yep, I'm negative, I'm ready to come back, when in fact, you know, they could say whatever to you. So again, those provisions are already in place under the Act to allow for payment while they are waiting that test. You just need to make sure they know what to do when that situation arises. And I'm seeing a big gap there for a lot of employers because they're thinking, oh yeah, they'll stay home. Well, okay, they'll stay home. What does that mean? Who did they tell? Also remember, back under the Act, if they are capable of working from home, you don't have to pay them while they're waiting those test results. So if they are physically able to work, they're not, you know, sick, they're just showing symptoms and they're awaiting the test result and they can work from home, do you have that conveyed to the employees of how do they do that? That they can stay and work at home, get their regular rate of pay, do their regular job while they're awaiting those test results. So all of it comes down to communication, to thinking, what are we telling our employees so that they know how to deal with this situation when it comes up? And it's just going to continue to come up and up more frequently, because at least in Springfield, I think there is the general mentality, if there's any questions on display of symptoms, you're getting sent for a COVID test. So you're going to have somebody who's at least waiting for those test results. But don't forget, if they can work from home, they're not going to fall in under that exception on the Act. Information that may and may not be shared with others in the workplace. I think I see a question in the very back. I think you can require the documentation. I haven't seen anything otherwise. And, you know, at least on results, even if you're pulling it up in a portal, you're getting it electronically in a way that you could print. I do love a question because it gives me a time to drink and not have to listen to myself talk, which is a good thing. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Question was, for those of you who may not have been able to hear it, is that in a workplace, if you have to take temperature of a subset of women, and I think I know exactly what category of women you are potentially discussing, who at a certain age have a higher temperature naturally, you know, can we offer to that group, we're going to take the temperature multiple times, versus we're not offering it to the group that doesn't fall into that. Here's what I would recommend. I would do the same thing for all groups. And decide, all right, we're going to take probably forehead first is what most employers typically do. If that comes back high, what are you then offering next to the employee? Is it just we're doing it again with the same equipment, or are we offering the oral, you know, which is far more accurate? Put it under the tongue, see if you've got a temperature. I would offer the same to both. I understand completely where you're coming from on that and why would be offered. But I think it just makes it more uniform to be able to say, here's the steps of what we are doing. And the hush has fallen over the crowd again. All right, information that may and may not be shared with others in the workplace. Remember, just because we are technically in a pandemic doesn't mean that privacy laws still don't apply. But can you ask some things that you otherwise may not have been able to ask in the past? Yes. Guidance is very clear. You may ask your employees if they have symptoms that are related to that long list of COVID symptoms. So you can ask your employees, do you have the headache? Do you have the scratchy throat? Do you have the cough? Do you have, you know, any of nausea, any of the other number of things that are on that list? And the EOC has said that's fine. You can do that. So yes, you can do that. What if you have someone, here's the tricky situation. You've got an employee who's awaiting that test result. You kind of maybe think, hey, they might test positive. What do we do with the others who are still in the workplace? And there is some information that says you can, at least for the people they would be in direct, immediate contact, say, tell them you may potentially have been exposed. We are waiting test results. And then certainly when there are test results, and if they are positive, you need to start that contact tracing back out from that employee. And what is the realm? Do you need to give the time off to the person just because they were in a proximity of someone who is getting tested? No, not necessarily. Now, would that employee maybe decide, I'm going to go get tested and talk to their own physician and say, here's the situation, and their doctor may say, yep, I want to send you for a test? Quite possibly. That's a decision between the doctor and the patient. And so then you would need to treat it as anyone else. But the information, let's be honest, if somebody in your workplace gets tested for COVID, does everybody seem to know about it immediately? Of course they do. Of course they do. And everyone's paranoid. And heck, everyone's paranoid over just every sniffle in the office or every cough in the office. And, you know, if somebody doesn't show up for work one day, everyone's like, why is she gone today? Where's she at? What's going on? You know, it's so just because this is going on doesn't mean you get to violate every privacy that ever exists under the law. But you do have to stop and be smart and think, what are the true risks of exposure and who needs to know in terms of that? So there's really where the balancing act comes in. The questions that may be asked, I already kind of covered that one. Retention of medical information. As I mentioned earlier, this is information that is medical information. And you have to go ahead and keep that as you would any other documentation that you would get related to your employee's medical. Keep it in that separate medical file. Make sure it's separate from their personnel file. Treat it as you would anything else that they have to give you for whatever reason. When may an employee be sent home from work? Yes, you may send an employee home from work who is displaying symptoms that are consistent with COVID. You may. You may tell them that they have to be tested. Yeah. Is that going to be hard for employers to make those decisions? 100%. Because, you know, when you're looking at me and I've got my seasonal allergies going on, as an employer, do you want to be stopping to guess to say, hey, do I need to send this person home or not? A lot of it does unfortunately come back to employee responsibility on that, and that they know themselves better than anyone else and that this is something unusual. But yes, you may send that employee home. Remote work policies. A lot of us did remote work this year that weren't expecting to do remote work. Employers have learned a lot about remote work in the last 6 months. I don't know about you guys, but there was one day when I packed up a whole bunch of stuff from my office. It was a Friday. And I'm like, I don't know that we're coming back. And I was right, because I got a call later saying we're not going back. And our office is going to be closed for a period of time. And, you know, it was all very sudden. And it's been a grand experiment in many ways for a lot of employers on these remote work policies. Because before COVID, a lot of employees would say, yeah, I like the idea of working from home. There's mixed results now after this. But I think what's important to remember is all of us were thrust into this situation with no planning and no preparation. And it was just there. One day I'm at the office and one day I'm home. And that is not the best way to design a remote work policy or a remote work situation. I could easily work from home. Would it be different if I have a whole office set up, geared up, ready to go, full monitors, all of that, versus the laptop that I'm working on? Absolutely. So now that we are back at work for the most part, a lot of employers are still grappling with what should our remote policies be. And when you have those employees who are, say, awaiting their test results, and remote work would be a possibility so that they don't fall in under the act, how are we going to treat those remote work? So stop and think, you know, should these remote work policies even be used? What do we want them to look at? What worked? What didn't? And if we're looking at this on a full-time basis and not a panic response basis, what's going to be different about it? You need to decide which employees will be allowed to work from home. If you have entire groups that can conceivably work from home, are you really going to let them all work from home at this point? Or are we going to do a rotating basis of who works from home, who doesn't, who never works from home, who always works in the office? Have to think about those things. Equipment and security issues, I wasn't here for it, but I bet you guys already got scared about that. You know, anytime you've got your employer information flowing through different electronics, obviously there's risk of exposure there, that you're going to lose that information or it could be compromised. Scams are up because of remote working. Those studies are already out there. You need to balance the productivity and the safety of your workers. I think every fear of every employer is that my employee is at home doing nothing, that they're sitting watching TV, sitting on their couch, living the good life, and they're getting paid for it. And there's always the one end that will take advantage of situations. But if you're going to have a true remote work policy, you've really got to stop and think, how do I judge that productivity? What is that balance there? What are my expectations? Do I expect someone to be logged in 8 to 5 with that hour lunch? Or is it more fluid that they can come in at 7 o'clock, come in and start work, you know, take a little time off and then come back, and whatever the situation may be. So think through those things on your policy. Update your employee handbooks. If you already have a remote work policy prior to all of this, make sure it's still applicable. If you don't have one and you want to have one, make sure it goes into a policy. And remember the flexibility after the pandemic, whenever it may be technically done. Right before everything went really bad in March, I was down here in Branson speaking to their HR group on ADA. And I was chuckling to myself because the woman from the Taney County Health Department was speaking before me. And I was thinking at this point, nobody really cares about the ADA. We've all got other issues. I mean, this was just days before everything shut down. But I said this then, I'm going to say it again now. All of the issues that we are dealing with in terms of employee flexibility, how do we accommodate them with work issues, home issues, school issues, vacation issues, those issues are not novel to a pandemic. They've been here all the time. And they are issues that employers always have to continue to work through. All this pandemic did for a lot of employers, it was put it up on the forefront of how do we respond. I am always a huge advocate that as an employer, you got to work with your employees. And maybe that's because I work a flexible schedule, but it works and we make it work. And so you got to keep in mind just the traditional mindset doesn't always have to be the way it is, and that there are other options. And I think through this, we have maybe seen some of those options, but all the problems we're seeing through this were already all there, already existing. So you just got to keep that flexibility. Return to work issues. How do you handle the employee that doesn't want to return to work? Well, if you have a job, and if it's their job to come back to, and they are being told to come back, and they refuse to come back, it's a termination. It's that simple. And what I have advised to some of my employees is if they are doing this communication by either email or by letter to say, we now expect you to return to work on September 1 and you're going to be here, blah, blah, blah. Have a thing down at the bottom where the employee can sign, have it already printed up that says, I understand that I have a job to return to and I'm voluntarily not returning to my job. I am allowing my employment to be terminated, blah, 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 something to that effect. Have them sign it and send it back into you. Not that that's required, but is it sure nice to have that in writing when the unemployment claim comes around? Sure is. When they've signed and said, yep, I understand I had a job to go back to, but for whatever reason, I decided not to go back to it. The employee that expresses concerns related to both health and disability issues. I've had that come up for employers. Employees who will say, I'm high risk. I hit one of those markers of high risk for contracting COVID and having a severe case. I can't come back to work. Best advice I can give you, and very simply, and I realized how much time I'm running out of, so I'll kind of gloss through, but you still got to have those conversations with the employee. Is it necessarily a disability under the ADA? Don't know yet. Is it going to be asserted to be a disability under the ADA? Probably by somebody. So what does the ADA require? Interactive dialogue. So have that conversation with the employee, have that interactive dialogue and say, what are we looking at? What are your specific issues in which you believe you are at a higher risk that you cannot return back to the work? And if we return you back to work, are there any accommodations in which we can make to decrease that risk for you personally and still be able to perform the essential functions of your job? Got to still have that conversation. And that kind of touched on requests for accommodations also. All right, liability issues and waivers. I've drafted a lot of these already. I have no idea if they will have any power. I don't know if they will be effective, no idea. I talked to a different attorney and her philosophy was, why am I going to have somebody sign a waiver when we're in a pandemic? If everybody doesn't know what the risks are at that point, I can't help that. No waiver is going to change that because we're in a declared pandemic. I'm like, fair point. But if you want to have these waivers, what are you going to have them as? For employees, typically the waivers come under the effect of, here are our new guidelines. Here are things you're supposed to be doing. I acknowledge what these new policies are, of whether it be, we have to stay certain feet apart, we have to wear a mask in common area, whatever it may be, so that you at least have the employee sign off and say, I understand this is what I am supposed to be doing. Does that necessarily need to be written as a waiver? No. But do you need to write it as an acknowledgement so that if there were some sort of claim that came later down the road, you could say, we at least told them, here's what we're trying to do to prevent it, and we're doing it with the best possible advice that we can have up at that point. And that situation's still fluid and it's still changing, and that advice may change, but have them sign off on that. Waivers for customers are people who are participating in activities. That's where I'm seeing more of the true waivers, where somebody wants to participate in an activity that isn't necessarily required. Let me give you an example. Sports for your kids, dance activities for your children, events for your children, those sorts of things. Are they required to go and play football this fall? No. Are they being offered the possibility to go play football this fall? Well, not if you go to Nebraska, which is my team, but that's a different sore point for me right now. Had an attorney in my office ask me, are you throwing as much of a tantrum as your coach did over the Big Ten's decision? I'm like, probably. But should your child decide to go play high school football, is there going to be a waiver that's involved in that? Probably. Saying, here are the known risks, here's what we're doing to try to minimize it, but we're in a pandemic, you know. So as an employer, if you're offering those sorts of activities, you may need to stop and think, do we want those waivers? How are we going to craft them? Again, are they going to be fully effective? I really don't know. But frankly, I err on the side of have the waiver there, and then that's something to argue about later if there is a claim. Ooh, I'm doing bad on time, people, sorry. Medical marijuana. I am going to kind of breeze through some of this because a lot of this is background information. And so long story short, obviously we have medical marijuana here in Missouri. If you want to get approved for it, you have to get a card from a licensed physician for supposedly one of the reasons that are under the act, which we're going to see here. The rules were all developed. Currently, possession of marijuana is still illegal. Everyone needs to remember that. Do some people have their cards saying that they can have medical marijuana? Yes. Do we have any dispensaries operating in the state yet? No. So, can you have that medical marijuana yet? No, because there's no medical marijuana to be had. So, possession is still illegal. Can you get medical marijuana from another state that has the dispensaries open? No, there's no reciprocity. I can't go over into Oklahoma and get my medical marijuana and bring it back here in Missouri and say, hey, I've got my card here in Missouri, I just happened to go buy it in Oklahoma. You can't do it. Is the possession of marijuana still illegal under federal law? Yes, it is, which is the quandary for the most employers. Can you transport it over state lines? Legally? No. Are the feds kind of turning a blind eye to all of that? For the most part. It's kind of funny for Missouri, for the people who are the licensed dispensaries for growers, I should say the licensed growers, not the dispensaries. Where did they have to go to get that marijuana? Typically across state lines. So what are they doing right there? They're violating federal law to be able to go get the marijuana so they can bring it back here to grow it legally in Missouri. I wouldn't want to be on that traffic stop if that happened, but technically it's still illegal under federal law. It's still background information. Kind of mentioned all of that. All right, here are the medical conditions, and I won't read all of them to you in the interest of time, but if you take a look at it, these are serious health conditions. And so for employers who are dealing with employees who have this medical marijuana issue, honestly, a lot of them aren't going to be in the workplace just by the nature of their health condition. Not saying that they can't be. But do we also know that these are being issued for things that aren't falling under those categories technically? Probably. All right, is medical marijuana an accommodation under the ADA or the Missouri Human Rights Act? Let me answer that first for the ADA, federal law. Most times the answer is no. It is not an accommodation under the ADA. Are some of the circuits split on that? Yes. So you could go to different federal circuits, probably find different answers, but usually the core of the argument comes back to it's illegal under federal law. So we can't have an accommodation under a federal act that involves something that's illegal. Is it an accommodation under the Missouri Human Rights Act? Don't know, is the honest answer to that question. I think the argument will be asserted, but as of this point, again, we have no dispensaries operating. So we don't technically have any employees who should be having their medical marijuana yet, who aren't getting accommodated, who could then file their charge of discrimination and ultimately their lawsuit and say, you didn't give me that accommodation. Is it going to be a hot button issue in the next coming years? Yeah, we're going to see that get pushed. Already talked about that. Obviously, the Missouri Human Rights Act requires accommodation. So where does that leave us at? I think it leaves the question ultimately of coming back to, is that something the employee needs? And don't forget the fact you can't come to work under the influence of anything, legal or otherwise. I personally can't operate very well when I take Benadryl. I know it. I better be at home if I'm going to be taking Benadryl. So could I take Benadryl and go to work and be expected to perform, things with machinery? No, I'm not capable of that, even though Benadryl is perfectly legal. Same thing, if I have medical marijuana down the point when I can legally have it, am I allowed to come into work under the influence of marijuana? No, I'm still going to have to be drug-free in that sense. Also, federal contractors have the Drug-Free Act in which to comply with, which is a whole nother issue. So then how do we deal with it with applicants? How do we deal with it with job postings? And I always come back to the very core thing of you've got to be able to do your job without being under the influence. If somebody can smoke their pot at home at night and it doesn't affect their work production or their ability to do their job, I don't know as an employer as I'm not that worried about it. It's so much so as I'm not usually probably as worried about it either as somebody's just doing it illegally and recreationally. But if somebody is trying to tell me that they can't work without being under the influence of marijuana, I think the line gets drawn there because it is still an illegal substance under federal law and you still have to be able to perform the essential functions of your job. So I think that's where that will fall down at. See, I get ahead of talking on myself. Oh, one last thing I do want to mention, I did not touch on that bullet point. Be aware of other states nearby and what their requirements are, because every state is a little different. And some will explicitly say you can't discriminate against someone who uses marijuana in employment situations. Oklahoma, looking at you. So make sure if you're operating in other states that you know what their laws are. I was also supposed to talk about documentation. I'm at 12 o'clock. Sorry, guys. And what's funny is when I was preparing this, I wasn't sure I would have enough to talk about for an hour and a half, and apparently I talked too much. Let me touch on documentation very quickly. Documentation, I spoke on this back when I was here in 2018 also. Documentation is something I will advocate to every single employer every single time. You need to make sure you are documenting what decisions you are making, why you are making them. And the reason being is people forget things. I'm jumping ahead on this, but people forget things all the time. You have turnover. If you have a problem with Bob sexually harassing Sue back in 2017, and everybody has left by 2020 except Bob and Sue who dealt with that situation, you need to make sure that somebody knows what had happened with Bob and Sue back in 2017, so when you get the complaint next month, you can say, this isn't a first-time incident. We know that it's happened before. Why? Because there's documentation there, even though I wasn't the one handling it before. Memories are always going to fail. There is nothing more persuasive than a document that was created at or very close to the time it occurred in a jury's mind. Because in many of the things I deal with, it's a he said, she said, and I'm not playing specific genders there, but it's always someone's word against the other, especially in discrimination and harassment claims. What does a jury find more persuasive? Things that are written down. So if you have terminated an employee because of poor performance, and you have documented that poor performance over a period of time, and at the time that it happened, is that more persuasive as to your reason, as opposed to, say, a discriminatory reason? Of course it is. Of course it is. Make sure whatever you are doing in documentation that you are thinking of it as Exhibit A, because it may very well become Exhibit A. Make sure it's factual. Make sure it's accurate. Don't write anything when you're mad. It's not good documentation when you're writing something that you're mad about. You know, if you need to, take a few hours, cool off. Always have, or I shouldn't say always, but if you have any questions as to whether something is fair and honest and accurate, have someone else who can have that information review it for you and make sure that it is what it's supposed to be. Honestly, I've got some people in my office, especially like with emails, that I'll say, come read this email before I send it to make sure I'm not, putting off a tone that I necessarily don't want to put off. So you need to keep all of those things in mind for documentation. I'll touch briefly here. Remember, personnel files are the property of the employer. In Missouri, an employee has no right to their personnel file unless you give them that right. I cannot advocate that you give them that right. So make sure that you are keeping that information confidential, and if it is being dispersed or if it's being reviewed, it's under your policy and your terms, or in response to a court request. All right, my last slide, I'm only 2 minutes over so far. Issues that I think are going to be on the horizon. Obviously, we have Black Lives Matter. We still have Me Too going on. All of that plays into discrimination and harassment. Go back, look at your harassment and discrimination policies. Look at your practices. Look at your diversity policies. Be thinking in mind with everything that has been going on in the last several months. How do my policies play into it? I went for several months without getting any charges of discrimination because, frankly, no one was working. But guess what? I've been starting to get back on my desk again the last couple weeks. The charges are starting to come back because people are starting to come back to work. And a lot of those right now are currently related to return to work issues in one way, shape, or form. But we certainly have got this playing out on the national level. So we're going to see more of that. Same-sex and transgender issues. United States Supreme Court back in June did issue its opinion saying that same-sex discrimination is covered under Title VII as sex discrimination. There were 2 cases before it. That was the decision, wasn't unexpected. I would expect that Missouri is probably going to have some similar things. We've had some cases up before our Missouri Supreme Court that did not get decided on procedural basis, so they've gone back down to the lower courts. But it was a decision that was like, yes, this is covered under sex, the category of sex and gender under Title VII. You're going to have ongoing return to work issues. I don't think you can ignore the possibility there may be further shutdowns, depending on what happens this fall and winter. The accommodations and then leave issues generally. So these are kind of just some things that I see on the horizon. And I think that did take me, yes, whew, only 4 minutes over. I hate when speakers go long, so that's why I apologize. Any last minute questions before I turn this over? Yes, ma'am.
Is there a point when the employer can say enough is enough, your attendance sucks?
Question for those of you who may not have heard it. You got the situation of the employee who keeps going out and getting tested repeatedly, gets the sniffles, goes back. Can you get to a point where you say enough is enough, your attendance is an issue? It's a hard line. And that's not the answer you want, and I know it. But think of it for any other medical issue, also on attendance. If you're going to discipline somebody for attendance and or ultimately terminate them, take COVID out of the picture. If you have these same ongoing issues, but they've got the doctor notes as they're supposed to under their policies, you're probably not going to discipline them or terminate them. So just because they're saying it's COVID, discipline or terminate, better tread very carefully because you don't want to get the claim saying you didn't give me this time off under the act. Sorry, I wish I had a better answer. I got one back there. No idea. The question was, is the payroll delay, tax delay going to be mandatory? And that's the same question I got earlier. I have no idea. I really don't know. I don't think there's any clear guidance out there right now. I wish I had something better, but stay in touch, getting that information, talk to your payroll people, talk to accountants. Supposedly something will be coming out. I don't know. Gonna go back there first. You. Yep, it's you.
So piggyback off of hers a little, when you were saying that it's kind of on each case, so you can't say they've already taken it, they can't take it again, is the total amount pay on each case as well, the 5,110? Is that a total for each employee, or is that a total for each 2-week case that they're taking out?
It would be the 2-week period.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the other question that I had is...
But let me back up, and I didn't mean to interrupt you, I'm sorry. But in theory, really, for most places, it shouldn't be taking 2 weeks to get test results. But that's a side note.
And then on the number 1 that you had up there for the Family First.
Yep.
That's applying to just the employee that has the isolation order, not to the business, correct?
Correct.
Employee only. So if a business closed for an isolation order, it doesn't fall within that. It's just the employee.
Let me think there for a second. I believe that's accurate, but I'm not 100% sure. Let me say that.
So I can give you an example. If we had someone that tested positive, and we chose as a business to close the doors for, say, a week or 2 weeks, would the employees who don't have the symptoms, we're not forcing them to go get tested, do they fall under that act?
No, because it wouldn't be a quarantine order from the Fed, state, or local officials.
But if we were to get a quarantine
say,
order that we were tested positive, and so the business closed because of a quarantine order.
Yes. If the city of Branson, as an example, tells business, you have to close, and we are quarantining your employee, I think that falls in under the local quarantine.
Okay.
But as an employer, if you just decide, we're closing, we want to clean up, we want to take 2 weeks off, no, that doesn't fall under the order. To you, Gary. The question was, if an employee gets, or if the employer gets a letter from the health department that the employee needs to be off, do we need to pay them anything? Probably yes. It's going to depend as to why they are off, but if they have been advised by a health care provider to self-quarantine, or if they've got the yeah, probably. I know. I bring such joy to everyone's life. The guy in the red in the back.
For hourly employees, that they were making them check out and not pay them the whole time if they didn't have people coming in that they were working with. Can they do that on and off throughout the day several times?
Let me make sure I understand your question, because I think I may have missed the first part. I think the question was, if you've got hourly employees, can you make them basically
clock in and out?
Clock in and out if there's not work
times,
to be done, that sort of thing. Yes, you can. You're just changing their work schedule. Is that hard on the employee? And you might want to think as an employer, practically, how do I want to do this? Sure, but can you do it? Yes. Can you do it with your salaried employees who are exempt? No, because if they work any period of time, they've got to be paid for the full time. Yes. Yes. Maybe. I think it depends on what kind of loan you may have gotten and whether it falls into that. And honestly, I don't even want to touch that with a 10-foot pole. Got something back. I got a mic back there.
Sorry, to confirm, the 80 hours is just for the whole year through December 31st. They don't get 80 hours, 80 hours, 80 hours.
It's my understanding, yes.
So total of 80 hours.
80 hours.
Total. Okay, good. Thanks. If an employee is tested positive and we send them these questions, have you had prolonged exposure to other employees within the most 48 hours prior to your symptoms, and they say yes, can we send those employees home and pay them through the act?
Yes.
Sweet. That's what we're doing.
I finally made someone happy. I so very rarely do that. Yes, sir. It depends on the type of the leave that is being taken. And if you go to the DOL's website, it will show you which ones can be taken concurrently and which ones cannot be. I won't even attempt to do it from memory, but it's on there. Yes. In terms of the employee who has the exposure and sending them home, well, generally I said yes, because you can always send an employee home. And then I think it would fall in under potentially experiencing symptoms and is seeking a medical diagnosis. They may not have the symptoms yet, but if they've got the exposure, I would treat it as that. Yes. Let her come back to work on Monday. Vegas is very empty right now, if that makes you feel better. They're down like 90% occupancy. I get it though. I'm being facetious and saying some things, but I get the concern because you think Vegas or you think Disney or you think any of those spots like, oh, there's hot spots, lots of people there. Again, though, if you don't have a policy in place already, you certainly don't want to start with her and to single her out for that. And then you've got to stop and think, okay, really, while I get the paranoid of the exposure, is it really any worse than wherever my employees may be out running around this weekend doing whoever knows what? And I don't know. Nobody knows. And a lot of it depends on how careful is that employee being in any environment that they are choosing to be in, whether it be deemed the higher risk one or whether it's deemed one that's a lower risk. But if you make dumb choices in the lower risk environment, you've got your exposure there as well. So really nothing that since you don't got that policy in place, the most you could probably say is, we understand you've been to a high risk area. You got to keep us apprised if there's any symptoms and if you need to go home. And start counting your 14 days. Does anyone else do that? I may be the only paranoid person when I'm in a situation where I'm thinking, oh, this is a higher risk. Okay, I'm starting my 14 days on that. I got a lot of insurance people standing up around me. Oh, there you are. It's kind of like, think of it in traditional FMLA, when you've used up your time, you've used up your time. So I think that's where it's falling of once you've used up your time on those 2 weeks, you've used up your time. Now, if you've only used 2 days of that 2-week time, you in theory still got 12 days left for the next testing that you have to go and do. You've still got that block of time. If you don't have to wait the full 2 weeks or take the full 2 weeks.
Please help me thank Jennifer Mueller. Thank you so much.